Okay, we're live. Actually, I forgot to actually do one thing there, Neeraj, before we actually start, because since it is St. Patrick's Day and I do have some of that Irish blood run through the veins, and I did share this earlier, so I just wanted to bring this up to show people. I just think it's kind of funny. I've shared it a few times because it's quite applicable, especially for me. So it's I had the right to remain silent, but being Irish, I didn't have the ability. Yeah. Like I say, that one really resonates with me because yeah. I as you know, I got verbal diarrhea. I'm basically talking all the time. Well, that's my thing. That's I love to talk about things and I love to discuss big ideas. Well, you know that old expression, there's the ideas, there's the events, and there's the people. I stay away from the gossiping in terms of the people thing. I'll discuss events for sure. I find them to be important, but I firmly do believe that the ones that really gravitate to me and that really resonate with me are the ideas, the discussions regarding ideas. And I think that's what we're going to be doing today. So that's why I'm really excited to actually have you on the show. So without further ado, I know we've already talked in the past. And by the way, folks, if you haven't seen our past interview and it was related to Bitcoin, just type in Neeraj, his name, and you'll see it'll come right up on my YouTube channel. And I believe it's uploaded on my Rumble channel now too. And that was back in 2019. So it's definitely been a while. But like I said, I really enjoyed our conversation back then. And I'm looking forward to having the conversation with Neeraj again today. So I'm just going, without further ado, let Neeraj kind of explain what this conversation is all about. So go ahead, Neeraj.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on here again, Bennett. Yeah, it's been 6 years since we spoke. I believe it was back in 2019. So quite a while ago. A lot of things obviously have happened in the world since then, but really entertaining conversation about Bitcoin that we had back then. And the conversation we're going to have today relates a lot to stuff that I've learned, stuff I've done with the BC Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Party of Canada since then. But it also is an interesting blend of things I've learned working with blockchain. You know, I work in my business with various different blockchains. And one of the blockchains we discussed in the past was Ethereum. Bitcoin. And, Ethereum is another one that I'm not really going to be talking about, but I'm going to be touching on some of the governance that comes from that blockchain and how it kind of melds into the topic here today. So, what we're going to be talking about today is an idea I've been kind of mincing over for the past few months. And it, comes out of my blockchain and political background, which is a blueprint for a libertarian nation. So the idea of basically creating a new country with responsible voting, responsible politics, responsible economics. I really want to say that I don't really want this to just be a theoretical discussion. I mean, obviously, we're not going to go off and do this right after the podcast. But it's really interesting to talk about not just the theoretical, but also practical steps that could ultimately be taken to make, to execute a plan like this. Right?
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. Yeah, it's one thing to talk in the theoretical, and that can be fun to be, tossed around and bantered about. But yeah, we want to see these things come to fruition in the real world because there's just so many areas in our lives and so many areas in even just the economy. I mean, me just thinking off the top of my head here. So Doge is a perfect example. And I would imagine with Elon and artificial intelligence and the kind of people that he's got involved there. Now, I get it, folks. And listen, I know there's going to be a transitional time for the people who have these jobs that are basically, but I just got to say, just like they were talking to some of the people in the blue collar fields in the past, right? Hey, learn to code, right? Or whatever it is, but we're going to have to adopt, we can't just keep jobs for the sake of having a job. You got to think about, financial resources and how economies actually work. You don't just want to waste money, especially because if it's actual real wealth or real, income, that's based on a lot of productivity and a lot of labor and a lot of hard work and effort by a lot of people. So we don't want to squander that. But if you think of even in terms of the bureaucracy, right? So we don't have to even get to the point where you're teeking around the edges of some of the other areas where people would be more concerned about, like education and healthcare. But just in terms of administration and the bureaucracy, think about how many people sit behind a computer screen every day getting paid a whole lot more money than even just the average Canadian would, or even Canadians with, good half decent education that function in the private sector. But a lot of these jobs are not just redundant, but they're basically unneeded at this point in time because of such things as blockchain, that underlying technology, smart contracts, and the fact that, like I said, we have artificial intelligence that has now become front and center. So there's just so many areas. like Neeraj is pointing out, where we got to really talk about things. And once again, it's not about trying to pick winners or losers in the economy. It's just about evolving and adapting to the fact that we live in the 21st century. So anyways, go ahead there, Neeraj.
Yeah. I mean, just to touch on what you're saying, which is really interesting because I've been having, I'm a active member of both libertarian parties, especially the provincial one. And we have conversations all the time about efficiency. And it's really interesting with Doge down south and the fact that it's not necessarily getting the positive response that one would rationally expect it to get. But the reality is, if you're not acting economically efficient, my belief is, at least if you look at it at a business level, your competitors, there's nothing stopping them from being efficient, and ultimately, if their inputs, their costs are less than yours, they're gonna beat you economically, and you're gonna be out of business. I think that at some level, even internationally, countries need to act efficiently. They have no choice. They have to compete with other countries, considering we have limited resources on this planet, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and as Neeraj is pointing out there, like, we're not just competing in terms of, so let's just use the country Canada. It's not just that businesses are competing domestically or even interprovincially, but yes, you're talking about on the world stage here, and a lot of these businesses, especially the big one these days, or in terms of government, there's a lot of things that happen that transacts all over the world. So yes, if you let everyone else in other places surpass us in some of these advancements in their technologies and their ability to deal with things, then yeah, we get left behind, and that's not something that we should be doing in the West. Allowing others to be at the forefront of these things. We should be the ones leading the way. So anyway, sorry about that, Neeraj. Go ahead, man.
No, absolutely. No, you're right. And it's that complacency, right? I mean, I've been in the tech sector for over 20, 30 years. And, you can see cycles where a company that, they boomed, Microsoft, for example, in the 80s, 90s, then they got complacent with the internet. They didn't take smartphone technology seriously. They got complacent. They sat back on their monopoly, and look at where we are now, right? I mean, and these sorts of patterns of behavior, they exist even, I think, even with empires. I mean, empires rise, the empires fall. So, looking at the West, maybe empire is not the right word, but, we have to be cognizant of where we are and what we need to do to stay there. And, you mentioned AI. Same thing. I mean, I look at least in the tech industry, it's a ladder, and AI is just chomping up from the bottom, right? It's like Pac-Man. It's eating away at the lower skill jobs as AI gets better and better. And if you just stand still on one rung of the ladder, your usefulness, your utility, economic value is going to get trivialized to the point where maybe there's going to be a tipping point, and an AI can do what you can do. And, that's, you got to just keep learning. You got to keep running forward, right? Like, if you're just standing still, you're actually falling backwards. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. And, I will just say this one thing too, Neeraj, is actually, it's funny because I enjoy, there's a plethora of things that I actually watch on YouTube, all kinds of different, I mean, I get my recommendeds all over the place because I sometimes I get bored of some things, and I'll look at something else and go down a different rabbit hole. Well, kind of a thing I've been doing lately is a lot of like world travel and things. And a couple of the people that I follow, they've gone to, I just, one the other day I just watched was basically the biggest city you've never heard of. It was this, I forget the name of it actually, is this city in China. But like, as much as we're convinced, because this is where we live, this is the information that we're inundated with daily, is like, we're such an advanced nation and everything. And in some ways we are, right? But I got to tell you, folks, I've been watching some of these videos coming out of these places in China. Now, once again, I will point out, I'm not advocating for replicating in terms of China, in terms of politics, but in terms of on the technological scale here, the one that's challenging us for dominance on the world stage these days. Yeah, if you see some of the stuff they're doing over there in China, now, of course, we don't want the surveillance and the monitoring. I'm with you there, but there's a lot of other areas where China seems to be surpassing us in the West, and at least in some ways, in some regards. So yeah, let's there's I mean, I know history rhymes, so like empires, if you want to consider, like you were mentioning, like a place like the US as an empire, either way, it's not written in stone that after a couple of 100 years everybody has to fold cards and start all over again. We have free will. So actually, in the modern age of information, the modern era that we live in, is what we should be doing is, like Neeraj is saying, is look at that writing on the wall and don't wait till the time where you're caught with your pants down. Start getting out in front of this stuff now so that we can adopt these kind of technologies, which are going to be a lot of these things. Yes, there's some things that are going to come with some things that may have bad effects on humans, but there's a lot of other areas where it can have very, very positive effects on humans. So anyway, sorry, Neeraj, go ahead, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting. And, one of the things I'm going to touch on in my kind of sort of 5 sections to the area, what I kind of want to talk about, which is building a libertarian nation. And, there's a problem statement, then there's a solution, and then there's execution, right? But one of
Right.
the things that I'm going to get into later, which you kind of touched upon, is it's kind of like critical thinking, and it's the absolute absence of it, especially where we live. Like, I mean, I'm not really familiar with how people vote and behave in countries unlike Canada, but I definitely see an absence of critical thinking. And to put it more specifically, paying attention to history. People don't necessarily really read books. They don't really understand what happened 50, 100 years ago. And it's like you're talking about the writing on the wall. It's not that these patterns of behavior haven't occurred in the past. They have. And we just have to look back and see and realize that, hey, you know what? If we want to be relevant, maybe we need to break that pattern and behave differently, right?
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, so yeah, I'm completely, you kind of got me hooked here now. So I want to hear how this actually all unfolds. So is there a part 1 that we're going to start with here?
Yeah. There's kind of like 5 points. So I'm just going to touch on them high level just to kind of give us some structure here, if I may.
Sure.
So, I'm going to start with why are nations failing? So the fundamentals of governance collapse, right? How do we actually then solve that problem by creating a sovereign libertarian country? And I'm literally talking a country here, not just some sort of economic zone or, building some sort of island floating off the shore or something. There's all these ideas that have happened. And then I'm going to talk about something that I think is really, really key to all this, which is a voting system, a proper voting system that is based on competence, not based on just existence.
Right.
And an economy that works with zero taxation. One of the big challenges I run into, even with some of the most libertarian-minded people, is how do you even run a country without taxation? And then lastly, we're going to kind of end it with something that's actually really important, a step-by-step execution strategy. So how would we take over the world? Or sorry, a real world takeover plan, I should say, to do this, right? And I must emphasize, obviously, before we get into this, because some of the people listening to this might be thinking, wow, this sounds a little bit aggressive. We are libertarians. I'm a libertarian. You are. Obviously, we're peace-loving people. Some of us are pacifists. I'm not talking in any way, in any form, about any sort of coercion or force, military rule, anything. Everything here is peaceful. It's based on the will of the people, right? Ultimately.
Yeah, and actually, before you start, the people that would be concerned with that is, I got to tell you, where my wife works in the groceries, and there's a lot of point of sale purchases and stuff, and she's more in the management side of things now. But you see this that people can get hesitant, but then you see that actually there's that flip side because she's been telling me even there's a lot of seniors. There's a complex behind the grocery store, but now you're even seeing like seniors, people that you would least expect to see, using their phone to pay for their groceries, right? So actually, yes, people can be hesitant, but the thing that I think is the big determining factor is it convenient? Is it trustworthy? Right? These are, if you cover these bases, then I think people young and old will, and of course, you want to make sure you read your contracts. You want to make sure you're at least knowledgeable in terms of what kind of contract you're engaging in, for sure. But adopted technology isn't something that should scare you. It actually should be something that should entice you, because if it can save you time, energy, and those vital resources that we work so hard for, then I say go for it. Anyways, go ahead, Neeraj.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's start, Bennett, with the problem. So why are today's nations even failing, right? So, one of the subpoints there is governments, they expand until they collapse. Think of it like even a balloon. You can't just keep pumping air into it over and over again. Eventually it will pop. And the problem is most people are not really aware of basically what I would call immutable laws of thermodynamics and economics, right? These things don't change. It doesn't matter how much you argue about it. They will never change. Surely we've heard about this thing. There's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary government program, right?
Yeah.
So governments never like to shrink. They, they brought in the carbon tax in Canada, for example, many years ago. And I've already heard talks about, well, how are we going to deal with getting rid of the carbon tax? That's a revenue. And it's like, well, it wasn't a line item in terms of your inputs before the carbon tax came in. It got added in, and now it's become a dependency, right?
Mm,
So, governments once established, they just never shrink, and that's just not sustainable.
mm. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's
So
for sure. You said a mouthful there, and especially when you're talking about the actual rampant growth in government. It's grown to the point now where it's in Canada, it's basically sucking up half of our almost, well, what is it? I think around 40% of our economy now is basically soaked up by government. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, absolutely. Like there's the bureaucratic inertia, which is basically just continuing, and then there's a cycle of government growth, right? So a crisis happens. We had COVID here. We had 9/11 down in the States. I
Mhm.
was living in the United States at the time, actually. Then the government expands to fix the crisis. Now it could be economic, it could be political. They had the Patriot Act. They had Department of Homeland Security. All these things are supposed to be temporary. Up here, we had we had the carbon tax that came in, and now we've got Carney coming in. He's saying he's going to get rid of it, but honestly, it's really hard to see that things that are introduced ever go away. The income tax came in what back in the
Nin
20th century as a wartime tax to fight the
Yep.
Germans,
Yeah,
and some
1917, Neeraj, and I've shared that post around so many times, and you can find it at wartime/canada.com or .ca. I mean, I've shared it around so many times, and if you actually read the document, which so like, yeah, before 1917, there was no such thing as an income tax. But if you actually read the document, even the people who the income tax were imposed to were relatively wealthy individuals and corporations. And I think the rate, if I remember correctly, was around 3 to 4%, or maybe 2 to 3%. So
right.
think about that. And it was supposed to be temporary in nature. And the people at the time, because Canadians prior to that weren't used to government taking money directly from their paychecks. So of course, when they said 2 to 3%, there you can even imagine the Canadians that were alive today that at that time were like, hey, now I don't want anyone taking any, and that was at a minuscule single digit amount, right? So now, fast forward over 100 years, they're taking. I think the Fraser Institute. I think the last one I seen is roughly about 46% of the cost of everything that we have to survive is government takes. I think that's 42%, like for your roof, your your housing, your clothing, your food, all the stuff that you need to survive was, I think, 42%. Government takes 46 to 48%. So government's actually to the point now where they're taking more than you even require to sustain yourself. So think of how far we've gone away from a couple percentage points, and only for wealthy individuals and corporations, to where we are today.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's I mean, I'm sure you've had the same conversations I've had with people. I mean, you're basically working for the government for 5 months.
Mm,
I've had conversations with people who support taxation, and I've asked them the question like, at what point does taxation become slavery? I mean, if I'm working 100% of the time for you, and I
mm,
never actually agreed to any sort of social contract by signing something, am I your slave?
mm.
Am I not your slave just because you have a badge? What about 4 months? What about 3 months? Like where's that tipping point, right? And
Yeah.
going to
Actually, Neeraj, I don't mean. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but actually, I wanted to point something out, because some of the people that might have heard me say this before, but maybe others who are watching today might not have. But actually, when you think about it, which I do, I like to think of things quite deeply. But if you think about it, slaves
Mhm,
weren't you? They didn't actually. The masters didn't actually take 100% of their productivity, because they had to have a roof over their head. They
right,
had to have food in their belly. I'm not saying it was great quality or quantities, but I'm
right.
saying they had to have a roof over their head. They had to have food in their belly. They had to have clothes on their back. And if they were productive, and bringing in a decent amount of cotton for the master, even if they got sick, they would have gotten health care. So, I mean, if you think about it, it's not that slaves had 100% of their productivity stolen from them. What number, what percentage that was, I don't know. That's up in the air. But like you're saying, more or less, is at the stage we are now, what is that number? Like, when are we slaves, right? That's a really important question. So thanks for bringing that up, Neeraj.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've actually made the contrast, and it's a little bit hard for some people to intellectually have this conversation, comparing the state of Western civilization where we are right now with something like slavery in the U.S. South, because it's exactly that. I mean, okay, sure, there's some extremes there. There was some extreme violence, but if you really look at our society, even here, okay, we don't even have to get caught up in the numbers. You made a really good point. They didn't have a social contract. They were born into that indenture, whatever, the slavery to their master. I was born in this country. I never signed a contract at any point, and I'm basically forced to accept a social contract. And if I don't, ultimately, if I don't pay my taxes, at some point, I do think it's going to culminate in violence. I mean, ultimately, it's going to take a while, but if I don't do it, somebody's going to come and knock on my door, seize my property. I might go to jail, whatever. It is ultimately going to result in force. So, really, what is the difference between the two? Really, what is it? So, yeah, taxation, slavery, I kind of think they're on the same spectrum, but this is what's continuing. And, it was single digit. Even if you look at the start of the American Revolution, I'm not an expert on it. I didn't study American history in any formal sense, but my understanding is what sparked the American Revolution was single digit tax without representation. We're talking single low digits, and they couldn't tolerate that. And they started a new country, a revolution that sparked it. And now we're at a point, it's the whole frog in the boiling pot of boiling water phenomenon, right? Like they turned it on, and now we got that slippery slope. And what's the difference between 40% and 45, really, right? What difference does it make at that point? And how far are we going to go with that?
Right. Yeah. No, good point. Good point. You're making lots of great points, Neeraj. Really good points, man.
Yeah. So, the governments, they're expanding. There's no control. Obviously, we're aware of this in Canada. There's also the myth of democracy, right? I call it the biggest lie ever sold. It creates a perverse incentives for politicians to lie. I've run in 2 elections. I've sat in on many debates. It's frustrating to see people being dishonest and basically promising things that they promised in the past. And more importantly, it's the voters. I specifically have an issue with the voters not really putting the politicians to task, not really sticking to their guns and asking them questions. And I brought this up in one of the elections I ran in, where really good politicians are masters of deflection. They're absolutely terrific at not actually answering tough questions. And the real art here is being able to walk away from a debate and making the viewer think that you actually participated responsibly, when in fact you didn't. So this is a real problem, and I'm going to touch on that in section 3 when I talk about responsible voting. But the democracy is really part of the problem. I mean, we think that we have choice, we think we have governance, but when you have a majority of people that are not thinking critically and they're not really actually I don't want to say angry, but they're not upset. Like it's actually really dangerous to accept the failures of the government and to keep quiet about it, because you're enabling it. So that's actually a big problem, and something needs to be done about it. So that's part of the solution that I'll be discussing.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing too, that when you're talking about voting and democracy, well, that's the thing. When in the absence of government, setting up schemes that has forced wealth and income redistribution, right? You can see the scenario where it makes sense. Like even in your own family, if you want to go, whether it's float down the river or let's say go to a trip to the park. Okay. Well, in your family, you might say, okay, we're going to hold a vote on that, right? To determine what particular activity. Of course, if the person decides they don't want to participate in either, they have voluntary choice to just say, hey, I'm opting out. You guys go do your thing. The problem is that we live in a world today where actual full-grown adults, most full-grown adults, have actually gotten and been convinced and tricked to the point that when it comes to our own personal economic bottom line, that they have some pretense that you can vote for that. Like that, this is the most insane part that people think. And of course, the minute you realize, and there's all kinds of past memes and quotes from past figures to talk about this stuff, but the minute you tell people that they can vote, by using government force to take from other people, well, this is what exactly and precisely what you end up in. So when you talk about democracy, I think it's really important, and I try to do this a lot as soon as that word comes up, is let's talk about, because really, if you're talking about democracy, that's majority or mob rule. Now, like I say, mob rule, if you're talking about situations where you have the ability to opt out, or there's not actual force or theft or things that are being imposed on you, voting is fine. But the minute there's force, coercion, or theft involved, or violence of any way, we shouldn't have the ability. That shouldn't even be part and parcel. People should know this instinctively, and especially if you go to school for 12 years, even if your parents severely lack in educating you or no one in your community, how is it that they're coming out of these schools pretending to be highly educated and you don't even understand that? No, it's quite immoral and unethical for you to vote to take away other people's livelihoods or their productivity or any portion of their wealth or income.
Right. Well, I mean, to touch on what you're saying, which is really, really important. I've had this conversation come up with numerous people, even people that are not card-carrying libertarians. The
Mm,
biggest flaw, in my opinion, in the schooling system isn't necessarily the courses they're teaching; it's the absence of critical thinking.
yeah.
That there is an ab. I mean, I went to school in the '90s. I
Mm,
went to Simon Fraser University here in Canada, in Burnaby, here in British Columbia,
mm,
and sure, they taught a great science program. I learned calculus. I learned English. I learned a lot of courses. But what they did not teach us was how to think critically, how to
mm,
question. It even
yeah.
happened in the lecture halls. I would say 90 to 95% of students, they meant well, but they wouldn't be the ones that would ask the professor questions. I was that annoying student. I was that student you didn't want sitting in the front row asking the professor, hey, but why? Like, why? This is the problem. People are not asking why. They are not questioning things.
Yeah.
They are taking things at face value. And actually think, Bennett, that is incredibly dangerous in a democracy. If you are actually tasking your citizens with making decisions that affect the direction of your country and they're not asking why, that is dangerous.
Yeah, and you got to think that after the multi-generation. So I think even when you're using like the healthcare field, but teaching as a profession would be another one. So most teachers, obviously throughout history, would have went into these occupations because they wanted to, not because it was a government job, right? Before the government took over education, but even when government took over education, the same with healthcare, you would have still had the people that had a lot of competent, a lot of skills. But I think as the generations go by, so what are we now? Since well, I mean, I guess the early iteration in Canada was basically actually when before we were even forming as a full-on country. So I think it was Egerton Ryerson in the 1840s that brought the Prussian model to Canada, and it just got worse since then. But if you think about the fact that your education system actually has all of these areas where they're supposedly teaching you, but the people today, oh, that's where I was going with this. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. So what it is now, back from then until now, it's been a constant degradation. So what we're now, because I remember even like you were mentioned for yourself, and I remember when I was going to school, yes, there was a lot of just learn to repeat, and that was basically, yeah, which is terrible because you're not teaching critical thinking skills. But there was I remember two teachers that were exceptional, and they stood out from every other teacher that I had. Now, one was math and one was in English, and they both like really helped me out tremendously in that department, and
Mhm.
especially the English one in terms of my ability to write essays. I really sucked early on, and she really pressed me hard on it. So, and I'm sure there might be the odd one off or the odd teacher out there that is still really actively trying but if you consider the curriculum, the administrators, the bureaucracy, the top down micromanagement, the way the culture is being shifted into trying to think in one way, you would imagine the pressures that are put on. Well, I mean, we've even heard, right, of whether it's God Sod, even in post-secondary. So God Sod, Jordan Peterson, we're talking even at the post-secondary level of education, how conformist and everything is. So they obviously, if they're trying to teach you to be conformist in nature, then they definitely don't want you to have critical thinking skills, because that would kind of negate their whole intentions, right?
Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, going to what you're saying, there's so many conflicts of interest, in my opinion,
Mm,
that are not being identified. I mean, schooling, universities, especially here in Canada, all heavily subsidized. Obviously, elementary school, high school, 100% covered by the government taxation system.
yep.
Post-secondary, heavily subsidized. The governments, they're going to push the curriculums in a direction to produce the types of people that are going to vote for them. That's not
Mhm.
surprising. I mean, a person like me, I'm an anomaly. You're an anomaly. We came out of a schooling system. We're not playing ball. We're the guys asking questions. We're the guys that are
Mhm.
not necessarily causing trouble, but we are the ones that are critically thinking. And
Yeah.
yeah, I ran into the occasional instructor at every level. I was very fortunate that I had that instructor was a hard ass, and
Mhm.
they didn't want us to just follow academia. They actually wanted us to ask tough questions. And
Right.
it's unfortunate that that's not necessarily the standard. I got lucky and I had that, and maybe that's part of the reason I'm sitting here talking to you. But
Mhm.
that's really, really important. And I think we would be a much healthier place if this was required learning. But honestly, I can see why the system doesn't allow it. If I
Yeah.
was in power and I wanted to keep power, I don't want people to ask questions. I want them to silently vote for me when the polls are out, right?
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Now that totally makes sense.
So, in terms of the electoral systems, I mean, I'm a little surprised, and maybe you can correct me if I'm on this, but obviously in the 20th century, we had the Communist Manifesto. I can't remember when it was published. And then we had Karl Marx, then we had communism. And we all know, I think everyone agrees, communism has failed. Economic communism now. I'm going to call it economic communism for a reason,
Right.
because that's the whole concept. Everyone gets equal resources. It's an absolute failure.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if there's actually a term for this, I want to call it electoral communism. And the idea here is, instead of everyone getting equal resources, everyone gets equal votes. And I
Mhm.
think that is a huge problem. It's still being worshipped everywhere in the world. And if I were to go out and talk about the idea that everyone doesn't get an equal vote, I would be getting a lot of pushback, to put
Mm.
it lightly, right? I actually think voting isn't just a right; it's in fact a responsibility. But people, they don't look at it that way. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, when it comes to the voting thing, just like I said, because of the fact that we are all at different levels in terms of competence, intelligent levels, right? We're in different areas in terms of what we want in our own personal life. There's just so many variables to take into account that I just don't believe that anyone, and this is the thing, it's like saying, and we understand this in almost every other area where people are vying for any kind of a space. So competition, right? I mean, you would never suggest that, in any kind of whether it's a sporting event or no matter what, anything that has to do with people competing with each other, is that there's different levels of competition. Every one of us, for all of us at work, I mean, I guess I should say there may be some people that don't work, but I'd say most people actually work. And yourself that the Pareto principle actually is a real thing. When you go to work, that there's a percentage of that workforce that's doing half of the work. And
Right.
there's a bunch of them that are standing off doing the least amount, trying to figure it. Matter of fact, sometimes I got a kick. I actually work with people like, if you put as much effort into actually working as you do to avoid working, you'd be quite productive. Know what I mean? That's hilarious. Actually, when you see it, it's like, man, you put a lot of fucking effort. Not to mention, I mean, especially with the smoke break thing every 10 minutes, like you're going to kill yourself an extra 5 years earlier so you can save, an hour of work.
Well, there's that scene from Office Space, that movie back in '99, when the efficiency experts come in and ask the main guy, about his work and productivity. He goes, and in a whole week, I think I do 15 minutes of actual work. And of course, the real satirical kicker here was, he was the only one who didn't get it fired and actually got a promotion for that.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, and obviously in voting, well, even when I think of some of the historical precedent in terms of, so when you even we use the word democracy, so go all the way back to Greece, right? If you want to talk like the birthplace of democracy, I mean, even back then, it was at least understood at certain areas in terms of the Greek methodology and voting and governance, was that. And the reason we call them aristocrats today is, yes, the people that voted, but you had to at least be informed. You had to at least be competent in some way. That was the point. Now, of course, that did leave some people out, but yeah, I'm fine with discriminating. This is another thing with words, like word discrimination. It's gotten such a negative a thing, but you know what? It's not, because we discriminate every day. Like, nobody leaves their door open so anybody can just walk in. You don't leave the keys in your car so just anybody can drive it, right? You don't want your daughter to just date just anybody. There's, damn well that most areas in our life we're constantly discriminating, and that's not a bad thing. Now, there is areas where you can discriminate where it can be bad, but the word itself, that's the thing with these things where you get these negative connotations, and they're usually done for a reason. And then when you try to talk to people, then you have to spend the first how many times just redefining these words for them. Right?
exactly.
And that's the part that's so difficult. And I've said this many times in the past, is clarity of language gives clarity of mind. And if we could just get to the point where we're talking to each other instead of past each other, because if you talk to a lot of people today that would be called on the progressive or the woke or the left side of things, when you're talking, and I try real hard to make sure I use the proper words in the proper context, in the proper meaning. But then I talk to people, and it's like, they don't even, it's like, I might as well be speaking Chinese or Japanese. It's like, we're not even talking to each other. And when they're speaking, they're using words so out of context, I don't really know what the hell they're saying. And this is a major problem, causes a lot of contention. And that's an area where, yeah, I 100% agree. Not everybody right, should be able to just vote on anything. That the idea that this is even a reality is sickening. And even if people who are big fans of democracy. Well, even if you have disagreements with Neeraj or people like myself or others, well, this is what the starting point is. If you really care about other people's voices, well, then let's talk about it and try to sort this stuff out. But that's the problem that we're finding ourselves with today is people like you or I, we're more than willing to engage in the battle of ideas and have very, vigorous discussions and debates and try to figure and hammer this stuff out. But the people who are constantly battling against us don't even want to engage. So do they have any honest intention? Do they truly care about democracy or other people's preferences or wishes or opinions or perspective? It doesn't seem that way to me.
I think they're honestly, Bennett, scared of us.
I
The
think
last
so.
2 elections that I ran in, I was unable to get in on a lot of the debates. I'm not going to necessarily assume what the reasons were, but it's a real shame that parties like the libertarian parties at the different levels are not able to get in there because honestly, the debates I got into, I'm not going to mince words. I was absolutely able to make a point. I had many people come up to me and pat me on the back and say, "Where the heck have you been all this time?" And I was like, "I've been here all this time, but you guys don't want to vote for us, and I can't get on television. You guys won't even show our party in the polls. Like we don't even show up as a blip." I mean, it's kind of a catch-22. How are we supposed to get votes if we can't get up on the debating stage? Some of the rules require, again, it's a catch-22. You have to have seats in parliament or in legislature before they'll even give you funding. Well, how are we going to get there if we don't have the funding? I mean, it's such a problem. So absolutely, I think they're scared to talk to us. And going back to the language thing, I cannot have conversations with a lot of people for the very same reason. There's so many words now that have been almost blacklisted where you're spending more time putting out disclaimers on semantics because discrimination, like the word discrimination is automatically negative. But the reality is, Bennett, as you said, we're doing it all the time. We discriminate against 14-year-olds from getting driver's licenses. Why? I mean, is that unethical? That's discrimination. We discriminate when you go to the movie theater. Discriminate pricing is part of economics. It's standardized. I would even venture to say that in our country, we discriminate more than we don't discriminate. Yet, when it comes to voting, discrimination is an absolute no-no. It's like heresy to even discuss it, right? And the result is where we are. I mean, I'm going to touch on that, but that's really where we are, right?
Yeah. No, great points, Neeraj. And I could totally see where if you were in a debate and you actually got a chance to say something where your opponents were probably sweating bullets because you definitely know how to articulate yourself well.
I'll just touch on it real quick. I was in a debate in 2019 in the federal election in Burnaby, New Westminster. I won't put any names out, but I kind of raised my hand and I kind of asked the host, "Hey, can I talk?" And I basically put it out. And this is something to anybody watching this, I'd like them to really take note of this. If you're asking a question to a politician, especially an elected one who's been there for many terms, make sure they answer the question. And if they don't answer the question, don't let them off the hook. I actually brought up the point that politicians, really successful ones, are masters of deflection. They're really, really good at not answering questions. And that is terrible. You need to make them answer the question. And if they don't answer it, press them to answer it. I welcome people to come and ask me the questions. I'm always welcome to it. I think any libertarian is able to answer those questions, but we just don't get those forums, right?
Yeah, good point. Good point. Once again, excellent.
So, talking now about, the solution. So the next 2 points I'm going to talk about, I think they're going to be really fun to talk about, both because they're so radical in some ways, but they're also really, really interesting. And I think they'll be fun to discuss. So the first solution is, well, you want to start a new country. Well, how do you do it? Well, the only real option other than going and getting carving out an economic zone out of Dubai or somewhere is to take over an existing country. And I know that sounds terrible. We're not talking about marching into a country with guns out. No, nothing like that. I'm talking about a peaceful takeover of an existing country that would benefit from that takeover. So, this first step I would say is identifying the right target country. So it would be a country that's really small in population, politically unstable or mismanaged, because obviously necessity is the mother of invention. They actually need to have change. I think one of the problems we have out west is we're not actually in enough pain to actually warrant doing things like this. I think eventually we will be, but it'll be too late. It's almost like the smoke is out, but we don't see the fire. There is a fire.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
reliance on foreign aid, and international recognition. It's really important that whatever country's taken over actually is a country. The metaphor I like to give is, if you want to start a restaurant, Bennett, I don't know about out east, but in British Columbia, if you want to start a restaurant and you want to sell alcohol, it's really hard to get a liquor license. The easiest way to actually get a liquor license is to go look for a failing bar or failing restaurant, buy them out, rebrand, and take their license. So I'm saying, if you want to start a new country, you don't actually start one. You kind of go and acquire a country, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, right
so
on.
it's a fun exercise. I mean, you know, I was just looking online at some of the countries out there. Like, there's a country called Tuvalu, population 11,000, small country. They're a UN member. They're really dependent on foreign aid. There's a country called Nauru, 10,000. They have a really corrupt government, UN member. So, hey, maybe there's an idea there. So what would be the step two? So the first one's identifying the country, right? Step two, economic infiltration. Remember, I said economic, not military. So becoming an economic king. So how about this? And I think they did this down in the States in the 80s with New Hampshire, where they had like some number of libertarians that effectively parachuted or moved into New Hampshire, and it's like one of the most libertarian states in the union.
Yeah, the Free State Project. I'm actually friends with a bunch of the guys that are part of that run.
There you go. Yeah. The similar idea. Let's have, and I'm just throwing numbers out here, right? So don't hold me to it. I haven't given it tons of mathematical thought, but let's say we had 100,000 libertarians. They decided to relocate to Tuvalu, and what did they do? They bought up land, businesses, and key infrastructure, all civil, legal stuff. They got into the banking and financial sectors, and they established international investment pipelines. So they're basically building up the economy and building that country up. It's a country that's ripe for the taking, right? From an economic standpoint. So they go in there, and I think one of the big benefits of this is it's actually going to gain a lot of appeal from the local population. I mean, these countries are full of people that probably would welcome economic prosperity, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I'm glad you're bringing that stuff up. And actually, as you're going through it, I'm kind of thinking, is the Trump team and them listening here? Because China's basically trying to play that game. So America still, you got to step up your efforts here. Canada's waiting in the wings here. You got to bid for sale.
And I'm not suggesting they do that to us. That's what I'm saying.
I kind of joke with that. Actually, I mess around with people because they get all pissed off if you even mention that. But I kind of like to shock people's sensibility from time to time. But in terms of what you're saying, actually, it's funny because actually me and the wife, we watch a bunch of different, she likes watching the history shows with me and stuff. And even if you think about the Roman Empire, I can't remember exactly how the conversation come about, but you know, you think of it, there's always when people get the perception of a country invading or conquering another country, it always sounds like it's bloody, it's violent, and it's the most horrendous thing possible. And maybe it is, maybe it can be. But if you think about it at a time back in the day, if you had been part of some of those very antiquated, more close to the Eastern European centers or something, and Rome walked in, and next thing you know, you have like roads and running, or at least water, like with the aqueducts and stuff like. And all these modern technologies and their ability to do the kind of things that they could do with concrete. If you were there at the time, and maybe actually there's less levels of oppression and what would be called taxation, whatever, back then, you're probably thinking just along the lines of someone like I would have been. It's like, actually, no, I think I'd be cool. And actually, it's funny you mentioned the 51st state. Actually, for me, and there's a couple other guys here in Canada. Actually, here's just one sec here. We talk about this a lot, and I even went out and got myself a hat.
Oh yeah.
Just for when I drive around Fredericton, it's a big government city, so I like to trigger.
Okay, maybe I was going to ask you what part of Atlantic Canada you're in. So you're in New Brunswick. Okay.
Yeah, New Brunswick. Fredericton is the closest city to me. I actually live out in the country, and thanks to Starlink, I can live like a modern man in 21st century.
That's all thanks to Musk, Elon Musk.
Yeah, yes. Actually, that's beautiful about Musk. I love talking to people because Musk himself, when people say, what can one man do? It's like Musk himself has already given us, I think, 2 or 3 examples where historically you needed government for that. Now, hey, you got to get into space. No need for government now. You got private companies. Hey, you want telecommunications, satellites that actually will cover you for your internet and everything you want? Hey, no government needed or necessary. This is beautiful. And there's so many areas where even people who are staunch statists, well, they don't know that, but they're just believers because of the way they were born and everything horizontally enforced around them. But I even mention these things, and they even start to peek their interest, like, yeah, hey, wait a minute. Hey, you're kind of right about that. And I told them, listen, in 100, or I don't know exactly when, but let's say in 100 years, there'll be time just like when slavery existed. People say, "What, you guys actually had that was a real thing?" And
Yep.
you thought you needed government for all these things. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm not against the ideas that you're saying, because I will say in terms of the 51st state thing. Now, I kind of half joke because my roots are very Canadian. Where I actually live in the sticks here in New Brunswick, it is my whole family that's been here since this country, and actually before this country was actually considered. Back then it was Upper Canada, Lower Canada, but.
Right.
So I do have, and it is personal to me, but it's not so much and sentimental that I wouldn't love the fact that if we had something even remotely along the lines of an economic union, or at least, hey, hear me out, my fellow Canadians, and a few of them have been receptive. Can we at least adopt their constitution? And if we're not willing to do that, can we at least draft one ourselves that actually, acknowledges our actual rights, instead of gives them a get out of jail free card that gives them the ability, like Section 1 and Section 33, where they can deny that anytime they want? Because if they can deny them anytime they want, they're not really rights, they're privileges, right?
Yeah, touching on the Constitution, I agree. I mean, I'm not really necessarily going to say I'm okay with the 51st state thing.
No.
I love the United States. I've lived there several times. Not a big fan of some things, and I'm a big fan of other things. But their Constitution is an amazing thing. I had the privilege of visiting Washington D.C. a couple of years ago with my dad, and we did the whole thing, right? Like, we checked everything out. The only thing we didn't get into was the White House, unfortunately.
Right.
But one of the things I really loved was just, it got me interested in the Constitution. It got me interested in the amendments, and barring some things like the introduction of the income tax, I think the U.S. Constitution is something that Canadians can take very seriously. It's almost like a very refined version of where we really need to be, right? So I absolutely love that idea, and I think that there are shades of gray between being where we are and becoming the 51st state.
Yeah, well, actually, that would be a thing. And I keep telling my fellow Canadians, because apparently, and especially in particular, the progressives, they seem to be completely now all very ultra nationalists all of a sudden. They have such great pride in their country. Apparently, that's the way they're acting now. So I'm reaching out to not just the people who normally listen to me anyways, but hey, how about we reach across to the divide to these fine folks, these progressives, and say, listen, if you are so antithetical to the 51st state and all that, then let's not, okay, if you're against me, even the concept of adopting their constitution, well, hey, how about we forget the hockey games, right? How about we draft one that makes their constitution look like 200 whatever years old as it is? How about we take every little section that they did when they drafted their constitution, where there's areas where the government still was allowed to grow and have such a massive outsized influence and effect in our lives? How about we as Canadians step up the game and show America how it's done? And if we want to have such nationalist pride, if we want to have something to actually truly be proud about in this country, then let's do that. To me, this is the part that's most infuriating, is this is something that all of us, right? Even if you're a progressive right now, I would imagine even a Democrat in the U.S. would probably be pretty happy about, let's figure out ways to shrink government now, right? Or at least for the interim while their opponents on the other side. Well, that's the same in Canada. Listen, if you're worried about your opponent gaining power, it's because there's way too much power in government. So let's figure out to draft an actual document and get the people's mindset in that kind of thinking, so that we know how to constrain that government, and not just for those of us who are alive today, but for our kids, our grandkids, and future and successive generations. Let's step up the game, and Neeraj and fine folks like this gentleman are actually stepping up. They've already done a lot of the formulation. They've already done a lot of the groundwork. They crunched the numbers and the data. They're doing all these things. So if you want, just listen to what's being said today, and then maybe comment in the live stream, maybe, mention, or if you're someone that knows progressives, maybe share this. And like I say, let's get everyone involved, because I don't want to live in a country that's solely just libertarians. I know that there's going to be people living in this country that come from all varied areas of ideologies and backgrounds. But if we can at least agree to the rules of engagement in terms of our social or economic interactions. And nobody, I don't think, ever advocates for having shit stole from themselves or by their lives being micromanaged, dictated, controlled by others. So let's just find some form of agreement, draft a constitution that reflects our sovereignty, our individuality, and we can all get back to not having to constantly be looking over our shoulders to see who's in power.
Absolutely. I was going to touch upon one thing you mentioned a few minutes ago. By the way, what are we doing in terms of time, Bennett, today?
49. Go ahead, man. You go as long as you want. I'm all good with whatever time
Okay.
you want to take.
Well, you brought up a really interesting point about, how even like a word like takeover sounds, rather aggressive from, in terms of the semantics. And,
Mm,
I play a lot of games. I actually started my career in the video game industry, and I still play games at heart. That's one of my passions.
right
So
on.
one of the games that I highly recommend people not play because of how incredibly addictive it is a game called Civilization. I have
Mm,
no dogs in that race. It's just a game that I play from time to time.
yeah, yeah.
It's really interesting how it's evolved over the years. When I played it in the 90s, the only way so the way the game worked is you started with a civilization, and your goal was to basically win the game was to take over the world.
Right.
And the only way in the early version of the games to win was to develop your military, and whoever had the biggest fist or the biggest gun, they won, right? You take over
Mm,
other countries, you kill their armies, you take over the world, you win. What's
yeah.
really interesting that's changed in the recent versions is you don't have to win by ever lifting a finger. You can
Mm,
actually win using cultural economic influence.
yeah.
So you could actually develop a really amazing economic system or culture, and ultimately your culture percolates into other civilizations. The AI characters are playing against the game, and you can actually win without ever shooting anything. So I really find that quite interesting in terms of what I'm talking about here, where this whole kind of idea of starting a libertarian country, it doesn't, you can do that. I think it's possible to have an execution plan there that doesn't involve any force, and I would never advocate that, right? I mean, I
Right,
think
right, yeah.
most uh, libertarians would be absolutely against anything that would, involve any coercion. It's highly hypocritical
Mm,
for
yeah, yeah.
people in our place to do that.
That's right.
So yeah, so I mean, going along with that, I think that once that economic infiltration occurs, and I'm using the term infiltration loosely here because we've already established I don't have to put disclaimers out with the
Yeah, 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 yeah.
terminology I'm using here. Is political control and national transformation. So running libertarian candidates in local elections in whatever that country it is, right? Like getting MLAs, MPs, whatever level, and then control policy making and passing libertarian reforms. Again, using proper methodologies and legal mechanisms to do that, and ultimately dissolve old taxation models and rewrite the constitution. That would be the idea,
Nice,
right?
nice.
So you've done everything in a peaceful way. No country, the UN can't come along and say, hey, you guys pulled a coup, or you guys, you're forcing people, or you're doing something inhumane. No, this is all the will of the people, and the reality is the GDP of the country's gone up and everyone's happy. Like, the idea
Mm,
here is to do everything so there's absolutely no question of the I guess the principles and the morality and the ethics of what it is. Because really, a lot of this is not about what's legal. It's not about what people are passing in laws. I think it's about morality and ethics.
yeah. Oh yeah, I agree 100%. And actually, that's the thing when you're talking about the morality, that has to be the core for every kind of whether law, statute. That used to be historically, based on the history of not just Canada and the U.S. And actually, it's funny. It's actually still written in, if you read the Canadian Bill of Rights, is the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And the point of God being in there is the morality, right?
Right.
That's the point. Your laws have to be based on some kind of morality or ethics that is consistent with allowing for human flourishment. And that's what it is at the end of the day. And I think all of us, even our own personal lives, is, if you're not constrained, in your economics or in your personal life, yes, everyone has the ability to fail, even, parents when you're raising your kids, but it's not the constant the bailing them out or the constant keep them under your thumb that has created your kids to grow to be prosperous, well respected and self-respecting individuals. It was the fact that they actually got the ability to function, and when they've done these things, if they've done them themselves, that gives your life real meaning and real purpose. And that's what we're advocating for today, is not to micromanage people's lives, not to dictate people's lives, but to at least create the era or the area and the atmosphere where people can flourish. Doesn't guarantee everything, but it guarantees that even if you fail this time, you'll still get that opportunity to keep trying and trying again. Whereas right now, government is basically picking winners or losers in the economy. And, some people are just forever going to be up against it because of the fact that maybe their ideology is against the grain in terms of who's running the country today. And that's a terrible thing, because there's a lot of great minds out there on all areas of this field of spectrum of the political ideology that should be flourishing and producing whatever they can that can benefit themselves and everyone else at the same time.
Well, you just touched. I mean, thank you for saying it. You touched on something that's very American that I love: the pursuit of happiness. Right? I mean,
Mm,
I think even the Americans have kind of forgotten the thesis, which is their country was built once upon a time on the idea that you know we want everything to be structured so that if somebody wants happiness, they at least have the right to pursue it, and
mhm.
nothing is going to stand in their way to pursue it. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but at least you have a pathway, right? A logical, rational pathway that does that. And I feel that you're absolutely here in Canada, many other countries, especially with our progressive socialism in place. It's a framework that basically makes it close to impossible. Like
Yeah.
they're basically choosing the winners, as you just said. And this is kind of going back to why I wanted to have this talk with you about the fact that we really either we rewrite the book here, or the idea I have is, well, screw that. Let's just go and start a new country and do that. Like it's like starting a company, except we're starting a country,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was going with that.
Right on. Excellent. Excellent. So are we at the I think are we getting to the point where there's the voting? Because I'm really interested in
Oh,
I don't
I am itching to talk about the voting now.
okay. Okay. Well, don't skip by any. I want to get all the information, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely excited to hear about the
Okay, so the
voting.
new voting system. Here we go. I'm going to be getting the guys at my door with the stakes, the pitchforks ready to go when I bring this out. So proof of stake governance. So what is proof of stake? I'm going to try to save as much time as possible, not talking too much about blockchain, but Ethereum, which is one of the blockchains very dear to me. They have a governance model that was changed in 2023, sometime in the fall. They moved from something called proof of work, which is how Bitcoin works, to
Right.
proof of stake. So the idea with proof of stake is any new transactions that go through the network, or even new proposals. So let's say they change a proposal to determine what the fee structure is or the tax structure is in Ethereum. All the participants in Ethereum, think of them like the voters.
Right.
They all get to participate in the voting system. But here's where it gets interesting.
Mm.
Um, your the weight of your vote depends on how much Ethereum you actually have in the network.
Mm.
So it's a very
Interesting.
simplistic model, but it's basically based on your stake, your skin in the game.
Yeah.
If you have 100 times more Ethereum than I do, you have 100 times more vote than I do. I know that sounds bad, but actually, I've thought through it. I've talked with many people that are not holders of large amounts of Ethereum. But the logic is, if you have skin in the game, you're going to make informed decisions. You're going to
Mm.
make decisions that are going to ensure that your wealth remains where it is or it grows. And there's
Mm.
also a correlation that I'll argue that if you actually manage to collect that much wealth, you're probably more informed than someone that has less. I'm not
Right.
trying to say that people that are wealthy are smarter than people that are not, but I
Mhm.
think there is a correlation that if you've made that much, you've probably got a better idea of what's going on since you got to that state.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a possibility, but I would imagine, so clarify it, but there would still be limitations on what people can vote on, or are we just talk, or is this just solely in terms of the economics of things? So you can vote, but only things that have to do with economics, not like social policies. That what you mean,
Well, I
or
I mean, it's really everything, but one of the things I didn't really touch upon is it's actually the next thing I'm going to talk about, which
right?
is a voting system, which is a hybrid. It's not just what I just mentioned, but it's a hybrid of
Okay,
like proof of stake, which is like a staking model, like I just described, but
right,
also a points-based system, like let's say the immigration system we have coming into Canada, right? So
okay,
Canada has very different pathways, various pathways to get in. My understanding is there's also a point system. So you check all these boxes and you get points, and if you have enough points, they give you a PR, right? So
right,
the
right.
idea here is something like it's called like a voting point score, VPS. This is just a term I have here for our conversation. So
Okay,
your voting power is basically a combination of multiple factors. It's not just your economic kind of stake. And what I want to talk about here, and again, these are just examples. I am not in any way saying that these numbers are exact, but it's an idea for our conversation.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
one of them is an economic contribution. What is your personal economic contribution to the GDP, or like a PGDP, right?
Right, 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 right,
So the idea here is maybe every $10,000 that you contribute to the economy of Canada will give you a point. We're just using the term point, right?
right, right.
Now, job creation. If you run a business and you create jobs, every job you create is 5 points.
Right.
Civic responsibility. If you did jury duty or you did volunteer work or military service, maybe you get 500 points for each year of service you did or something like that. And then criminal record. Here's an interesting one. If you committed crimes, you get negative points. So it's a ledger almost, right? So at the end of the day, maybe you, Bennett, with your job and the work you do in the libertarian movement and your podcasts and everything you've done, let's say you've got a certain number of points and I got a certain number of points, and that ultimately will dictate the weight of your vote when we say have the next election coming up. And the idea here is going back to what we said. We want people to vote, but your vote really has to be discriminated upon. It has to be based on some metric that determines your ability to vote responsibly.
Right. Well, you know, when it comes to stuff like that, then, so here's the thing, that when it comes to stuff like that, I just, and I'm sure you've heard this before too, is just because as soon as you start bringing up numbers and reputation score, actually before even I ever heard of the China social credit score, it's funny because there's two areas where I've heard of these kind of things. One, it actually worked out beautifully, and it was just not just what I expected, but actually turned out great. So back years ago, I actually still do it now. Me and my son, we work out in my basement. We've got a decent little gym down there. But I remember back in I think it was in my 30s when I used to work out. And I've always been online. I've always been in the computers and stuff. And back then, or was I? Yeah, late 30s, early 40s. Anyways, but it was you've probably heard of a place called bodybuilder.com. It's a website. It's a forum type of setup. Though it goes all the way back to the early iterations of bulletin board systems. Then they turned into forums. Basically, you can create them all yourself. And on bodybuilder.com, because a lot of people, when you're talking about in terms of personal fitness and exercise, a lot of people have a lot of questions. I mean, that's literally what happens all day, every day, everybody asking each other questions. And it was amazing that, and if you had, I think it was 5 in the positive in the red, or in the green, but then it could go into the red, like you were saying, in terms of so basically, if people were asking you questions and they didn't get satisfactory answers, or it turned out that you were a bullshitter, or you were just selling, a product to them or something like that, you would see it actually as you scroll down the feed. There was always the profile picture and a few other pieces of information. And then it was the reputation score. And that reputation score actually did play a key role on that website. And most people got to realize who are the trustworthy individuals. And it's just like with everything, when you're talking about the Pareto principle, it was a small select handful of people who had usually had the best answers, have the best knowledge on these subjects and stuff. And that worked great. But the reason why that worked great, it was for bodybuilding, working out. It was opt-in. If I didn't want to deal with the website at all, I could walk away from the website. No big deal. So I see how that, and just like even today, when we're all making our Amazon purchase, we know that the reviews can be gamed. But we're always still looking to see if there's anything at all that can give us any inkling where there's a higher reputation here than there is over there. So I'm totally on board with that as a concept and idea. And I've seen how can be put into practice in the real world, and it works seamlessly and beautifully and can be quite positive and beneficial to us. But on the other side of that, the other scenario, of course, is the China social credit. So it's kind of along that same lines in some way, right? Like the more you do that, and of course, I guess at the end of the day, what it come down to me is, okay, but what gives you the better reputation? So let's lay out the rules. I think would be the big thing, because if you're praising dear leader, that might gain you extra points. But I don't think we would want that necessarily in ours, right? If you're cozying up to Trudeau or Carney, that shouldn't be something that gives you extra points kind of deal. So I think maybe that's some area of clarifying is, would it have to do with like just our personal things, or when you're talking in terms of governance, would there be areas where, if you're like, loyal to the corporatists or to the government, that you get a higher score than someone, or even in terms of money. So you're bringing up the money situation. That makes sense for people who are moneyed people who maybe have access to a fair amount of disposable income. But we got to remember there's always the poor people as well, right? So we don't want to leave poor people just by sheer fact that they have to be on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. We don't want to leave them at the back of the bus. So maybe if you can just help clarify some of those things.
Absolutely. And, there's some good questions coming from a gentleman named Sebastian in the chat.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Which relate to this, and I want to touch on it because it's very easy to look at what I just brought up and be like, oh my God, you're favoring the rich cronies who are funding the politicians and all that. And I want to emphasize that let's talk about this voting system, because I think it's actually really, really important that if this were to be put into practice, that this be structured in a way that is absolutely robust and bulletproof from things like like what, the things you mentioned, like special interest groups, people that are, just basically sucking up to the government. And there's a cycle where, they keep choosing the government, they keep getting richer, and everyone else is trivialized. So I think it's really important, because I did bring up proof of stake. And I want to emphasize that doesn't necessarily have to be the only metric. And it is a point system with many dimensions. So there should be a different model. And if you go back to the game I talked about in Civilization, there's ways to win the game without even having a military. So I want to just emphasize that there is and I'm not Buddha. Like I cannot necessarily say on this call exactly what those different points should be, but I can tell you that economic contribution should have some weight. It doesn't necessarily have to have a driving weight, but it should matter, because it's all about mathematical correlation, right? I think that things like civic responsibility, right? I mentioned, like, if you're doing a lot of volunteer work, like if you spend your entire life just doing volunteer work, there should be some sort of metric for that. So you might be the poorest person in the country, but you know everything going on because you've worked with the homeless. You've been driving school buses. You've been a school teacher. You've been volunteering and teaching the poor, whatever it might be. All these things. And I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a proper way to calculate. And you're seeing social score with China. I know it's funny. Again, we don't want to get caught up on the evilness of China, because it might be easy to parallel what I'm saying and saying, well, you're just talking about the same thing. No, I'm not necessarily really talking about that. I'm not really talking about your focus on political support for parties or anything. I think this is really what I'm bringing up, is this is an exercise, right? People need to sit down and come up with what are those points.
Yeah, no, I'm actually, like I say, Neeraj, trust me, I know you have nothing but the best of intentions, so I don't think anything nefarious of this, like I say, and I could even see areas, and people might find this a little shocking, but I can see areas where, like, it's just like in any kind of reputation like type system. I'm sure there's actually areas of the social credit system in China. There's some areas I'm sure that's quite detrimental to most people, but I can see some areas where there would actually be some benefits to it, right? If you're the kind of person that put in a lot of that effort over your life to be a good person, to build out that reputation, that credibility, right? Of course you should. There should be some meaning to that. There should be actually better word than meaning. There should be value of some sort to that. So I'm totally on board. As I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Sebastian. Yeah, I had forgot we're going to do some questions here. So yeah, so Sebastian, you attended University of Fredericton, right on, but it's fully online. Okay, so you didn't have to go into Fredericton. Well, that's pretty awesome, Sebastian. Now I will just mention this. Well, there's two actually. So St. Thomas or University of New Brunswick. Not sure which one you went to, but yeah, those are actually pretty good institutions, to be honest with you. I'm sure they're starting to get into some areas where it's probably a little bit woke in areas, but I'm sure you could probably still get a decent education in some regard. Anyways, this is a question for you, Neeraj, if you want to answer it or not. In a pitch style form, what is your vision for a Libertarian Canada if you were leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, I guess, elect Prime Minister today?
That's the question. Oh, okay. Well, wow. So, I mean, I would start. It's hard. I didn't really give any planning to this, but the first thing that comes to mind is government efficiency. I'm going to freely use the term Doge here, since it's actually very relevant. I'm not saying what's happening in practice down south is necessarily 100% correct. Not advocating what Elon Musk is doing 100% in literal execution form, but I'm definitely for the idea that a dollar saved is a dollar earned. So definitely go in and have some hard looks at the books at every level of government and save that money, right? I mean, we save that money, we have a surplus, we're cutting back on taxation. I mean, one of my number one things that I want to do is I want to eliminate taxation. I really don't think, especially in a country like Canada, with the resources we have, with all the potential we have, I really don't understand why we need to have the level of taxation that we do. I even am willing to venture and say that a lot of the social programs we have would continue if we actually ran things efficiently. I'm not saying I support the social programs.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm saying they could probably continue to run if we ran things efficiently with a minimal or even no taxation. So I would look at that. I'm not an economist or an accountant by trade, but I would say that I'm on an amateur level very good at it.
Yeah, well, I'll just even mention in terms of that is so when you're talking about all this money and that the government spends through taxation in such high levels, that actually, here's the crazy part. And for all of us in our own personal households that do our own personal finances and know that there's an actual bottom line, is we don't have the ability now. Some people I've actually known people in my life. I won't mention any names. Some couple that are personal that play the whole keep getting a credit card to pay off this credit card, and then you can kind of keep that scheme going for a little bit. But government is not even just the fact that they're at such ridiculous level in terms of taxation, but they're also getting us in a multitudes of ways in terms of the debts and deficits. So obviously, even with all of the money that they're already taking from us without our express permission, without our implied permission, but that's not even enough. That just goes to show you how insane it is, even at those ridiculous levels of taxation and the billions and billions of dollars that they bring in every year, probably however many tens or hundreds of billions. And that's still not enough because they still constantly run in debts and deficits. And the deficit in Canada now is to what, $1.5 trillion or somewhere in around that area. So that's obviously showing you that not only are they basically economically enslaving those of us who are alive today, but by sheer fact of the way how time actually works is actually it's our kids and our grandkids. And these are people that don't even have skin in the game. These are people that don't even have the option to vote for any of this stuff. Not that any of us would actually vote it themselves, but I think this point of it's one thing to economically enslave people that are alive today. It's quite another, because at least they can suggest, well, you live here, so you're accepting that, the whole pretense of the social contract. But you can't say that for my granddaughter who's 3 months old, right? You can't say that for her. So yeah, in addition to all the taxation that they take from us, and where a lot of that is wasted, like you were saying, but then the debts and deficits of this imposing so much economic hardship and stuff on future and successive generations that had no say in the matter and no skin in the game at all. That's as immoral as I think a person can get when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, if you really think about it logically, if you're running a deficit, let's not talk about the debt for a moment, because the debt, let's just say mistakes were made in the past. If the debt's reducing every year, you could argue you have a responsible government and they're basically putting the fire out. But the reality is, if you're running a deficit, on the other hand, which is really different from a debt, if you're running a deficit, you're actually imposing slavery on the future. That's basically what you're doing. It's a slavery contract that your future generations are you're kicking the can down the road, right?
Right.
So that's not really solving any kind of problems. And you talked about taxation. One of the things kind of segueing into it is if you ask most Canadians or anybody really in the Western world, what are the different taxes you get charged? They'll come up with the obvious suspects, right? Property tax, sales tax, income tax. You know what they don't mention? Inflation tax.
Yeah, that's the hidden, the stealth tax.
Holding money in your damn savings account.
Yeah.
Every day it's sitting in there. Every second it's sitting in there. It's being taxed.
Yeah.
It's a small little fun experiment. I went online and bought Big Mac coin. McDonald's issued Big Mac coins back in 2016 or something.
Oh,
and
really?
I went and bought a bunch of them on eBay just for fun.
Yeah.
I paid a lot of money for them because they're collectibles. But what I did is I went out to McDonald's and I actually asked them if they'll accept a Big Mac coin to give me a Big Mac. And they said yes. And here's kind of the interesting kind of commentary on this. Those Big Mac coins were sold for face value back in 2016. They were so let's say Big Macs were $4 in 2016. Right. I could buy a Big Mac coin for $4 in 2016. I hold one right now. It was paid for $4. Now, if I go into McDonald's today and I hand them a Big Mac coin, I can get it for $4. Yeah. I cannot buy one with a Canadian dollars for $4. So what is my point? That coin that I'm holding is actually a form of money. It holds all the attributes of money. Canadian dollars actually lose value because they're being inflated out of existence.
Yeah.
So,
and bare minimally as central banks in terms of Canada, US, ours is between 1 and 3, but mere minimally in terms of the Fed, 2% a year. And after 50 years, folks, think about if you take, inflate the money supply, which then affects the price increases on everything around you because it's arbitrary, right? That's the thing with central bank. Inflation that's natural, increasing the money supply when there's actual demand for it is fine, right? But when you're just arbitrarily increasing the money supply and you're creating it by a couple percentage every year, which in turn devalues it. Well, I know the American dollar is much easier to figure out in terms of their worth because they're the reserves currency. But I believe at this point in time, 97% of the American dollar, and that's with them being the reserve currency and doing lots of messing around, having lots of assets and the whole. Well, you got to think about the bonds. There's a lot of different areas you can put into this, but they have lost in terms of the purchasing power at least 97%, but I would suggest it's a whole lot more than that, because if you think about this, here's the thing. And I don't know how they measure that 97%, but what I used actually as an example, Neeraj, yours is a great one, the Big Mac, but what I used, and I actually did this when I worked in a construction outfit up in Ajax, Ontario. And the guy, because they were all sitting around, it was lunchtime, and I love getting people thinking. That's what I do. And the boss, we were kind of just talking about, I had just walked up to see if I could get hired at this place. And so we were talking, the people, a couple of them were listening, the rest of them were eating, but I more or less, he was asking like, well, what are you looking for, like an income kind of deal? And I said, I tell you what, if you pay me $1.25 an hour, I'll start tomorrow. The only stipulation is it's got to be in silver, because at that time, I think the wages for the particular job I was going to do at the time, I think was like 16, 17 bucks. And silver was basically trading in around that for an ounce of silver. And I said, the only stipulation is it has to be in coinage that was minted prior to 1960. I think it's 1965 or 66. And it really got him, and it definitely these young guys were. And then I explained to them that actually that's $1.25 back, in the 60s, that was $1.25. And it's still $1.25 in terms of what they're showing in terms of the coinage. But if you took that right now, melted it down, took it to a smelter, and then sold it off as silver, well, that now is worth $16. And it just made the young lads, and even the guy that was thinking about hiring me, it made them like really, and they probably thought I was a little bit weird for bringing that stuff up. But I love to talk about these things, because that's the thing. People go through their whole lives. They cruise through their whole lives. I mean, people now are even in the retirement age, people my age, and they still haven't learned these things. It's like, it's really, really important. If you want to understand the world around you, and if you want to have a governance type of system, bare minimally, you got to understand this stuff, because you're not making the right or wise decisions, no matter what your intentions are, if you don't understand at least how the economy works, and how actually the currencies actually are created, and how central banks function.
Well, I mean, the stuff that we're talking about, even the stuff that I brought up with you now, and even 6 years ago in our Bitcoin conversation, there's a lot of stuff there that's not new. I mean, Bitcoin's new, but all these things about how voting works, how we have a fiat system where our money's basically backed by faith or government, government pressure that thou shalt use the Canadian dollar. I mean, okay, that's the only reason we're using it. I mean, it blows my mind and I'm sure it blows your mind if you think about the fact that we got through 12 years of schooling in Canada and went through the university system and never learned any of that. I mean, I did really well in school. I didn't know any of the stuff. Why didn't I learn it? I mean, it's really quite stunning. And in a way, it sort of explains in a lot of ways why we are where we are.
Yeah, it kind of goes along lines. You don't like to think that there's any nefarious reasons, but you got to kind of accept that, yeah, that's probably the case, at least for a sizable portion of the people in the education system, because COVID was the same thing. It wasn't that they lied. A lot of the times it wasn't that they outright lied. They just distorted the truth or omitted facts, right?
Right.
And that's the thing when you're going through education. They might not be, although some may very well be, but it's not necessarily that they're always lying to you. But if they're omitting very, very important key information, it definitely changes the paradigm. But anyways, I did want to get, because I'm not even sure what this means. You might anyways. So Sebastian was asking what we or mentioning, what we need is a DOA, not a proof of stake system. This is real skin in the game, because the failure of a DOA is not a failure of an entire banking system, more like a failure of a company. Now, I'm not even sure what a DAO is. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind me interjecting, actually, and I was going to bring it up. Sebastian brought up a really good point, and I thank him for it, because I didn't really mention it yet. It's a DAO, so decentralized autonomous organization. So we have DAOs in the blockchain. Sebastian might, in fact, know more about them than I do, considering he brought it up. But the basic idea here is you have effectively an entity, and it lives in the blockchain. So you can implement DAOs in various different blockchains. The one that I'm going to talk about briefly here is Ethereum. So the idea here is, forget about a corporate registry, forget about like setting up a company with, your local province or state. The idea is instead you basically have an organization decentralized. It's sitting on the blockchain. Its governance is driven by smart contracts. So you could have a token that's released that becomes the currency for the DAO. It doesn't necessarily have to have a token, but it could. And the idea then is, and I know Sebastian was talking about the centralism of proof of stake. And yes, there are some issues with it. I'm not saying proof of stake is the end all, but the idea with a DAO would be that all the participants are holding your token, in various degrees, and they're voting on different propositions and different ideas. So one of the things that has been a part of a conversation I've had with people is, well, what if you started a website or a company, and instead of incorporating it and running through all that bureaucratic nonsense, it was a DAO? Like, it was actually funded by a DAO, and the participants in your website, the people that are maybe creating the content, are determining what updates go to the website, or maybe, what are the rules? Let's say you're building a Reddit. What are the rules in terms of what posts are allowed and what are not, are actually driven by proposals on the DAO. And what is the DAO? It's actually a smart contract. So if you, Bennett, wanted to go in and say, you know what, I don't really like conversations that talk about the Middle East so much. I want to cut it down. Maybe it's a little bit, they're talking about Palestine too much. Maybe I think it's too violent. Maybe it's not family friendly. You could vote. You could create a proposition for that. People can vote on it. And then there would be almost like a form of direct democracy, and it's driven by the blockchain. So that's kind of the idea with a DAO. I might not have defined it perfectly, but it's a form of democracy that lives on the blockchain, driven by smart contracts.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for explaining that. So Sebastian, in response, he also put, I'm not just bringing this up. I work in blockchain. I've seen proof of stake destroy the meaning of what cryptocurrency is. Proof of work is where real security lies, and the people who, here, I guess we'll go on to this, sell lies through POS know this, point of sale. No, I don't know. But
proof of stake.
Proof of stake. Sorry, but they can sell the same thing as POW, but with fake proof of stake. You need to make a better case for if you're going to tell people it's how we will vote in the future. So, anyways, you go ahead and reply that. I would. Yeah.
Just to be clear, I mean, going back to what I was saying, I know that depending on how you took what I said, you could take it literally and say, I think proof of stake is how we should run our country. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's one of the many points on the diagram that we can connect up. I think there's many different points. So that's what I'm saying. I think that voting is a multidimensional metric. It actually is a combination of many factors. And I would say that your stake in the economic game is one of the things. It's not the only thing. And the degree to which it affects your ability to vote or your weight is something to be determined. So these are exercises that I think smart people need to kind of have, right? They got to go through the exercise and determine what's fair. So I think Sebastian's bringing up a good point, and it's good to emphasize that that's not the only metric. Just like the only metric really shouldn't be like I've had talks with people that said, well, you should vote if you were in the military. And my pushback is like, wait a minute, are you telling me that only people who are in the military get to vote? What if a school teacher worked for 25 years teaching calculus and math, and they voted responsibly and they understand government? They don't get to vote. Just so you know what I mean? It's not a simple equation. I think it's a more complex equation. And I do think that stake is one of the many variables in that equation.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will just mention, here's the beautiful thing, and I'm pretty sure, I suspect that Sebastian is probably libertarian leaning himself. So here's the thing that I like about this, Sebastian, and as well as for Neeraj, is because we come at things, without using force, what we're doing is we're just bantering back and forth. So even if you think about, just do a thought experiment here. Think about the founding fathers of the United States, right? There was a bunch, and we won't drop all the names, but there was some, and I actually have both books. So there was the Federalist Papers and there was the Anti-Federalist Papers. There were some of the founding fathers that were quite anarchistic in their mindset. They just did not trust authority at all, period, and for good reason, right? But then there were other ones who were thinking more along the Roman model, and adopting that, but with a modern, updated version of it, with more secured protections and a better understanding of things. All those years, hundreds of years later, and what it was is all of these folks sat down in big, gigantic rooms, and they hammered out these ideas. And the reason why the Constitution that ended up finally getting drafted, and with the many amendments, you got to remember too, because even after its initial draft, right, there were amendments that came quite successive after that, and quite quickly actually after that. So this is the thing, all we're doing, and this is the beautiful thing about this kind of a space, is nobody has to get worried or upset or apprehensive in terms of anything that Neeraj is bringing up, or that Sebastian will do in terms of pushback, or anything that I might even say, because this is what we're doing. We're basically doing the same kind of thing, as we're trying to develop these ideas. And the beautiful thing about having multiple perspectives is there's going to be blind spots every one of us have, and someone else can help point that out, like I'm sure they did in the past, and many others. Like I say, even when you're starting up a business or you're on the board of directors, this is the kind of stuff that takes place, and it takes people like Sebastian and Neeraj to sit down and talk about this stuff and be able to think about these things. So I get that some of the people that are listening to this, you might get a little bit upset and apprehensive by once you start hearing things like in terms of, you know, the blockchain or like any kind of credits or reputation. But once again, we're not looking to create a, you know, any kind of dictatorship here. We're just basically, you know, tossing out ideas and seeing what ones will stick and what ones won't. And that's the beautiful thing about doing this in a kind of a libertarian space, is we're not looking to impose our ideas on you. We're just trying to come up with some so that hopefully we get out from under this big gigantic behemoth of a state that is barreling down on us and crushing us on a regular basis.
And yeah, and you know, it's a great point. I mean, I don't have it here in the background here, but in my office downstairs, I have two huge posters on the wall. One of them is "Thou shalt not commit logical fallacies," and the other one is cognitive biases. And you know, I think one of the big things that I love about libertarians that is really absent, unfortunately, in many of the other parties in the different political spectrums is knowing that we don't know what we don't know. Right. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? I mean, I'm sitting here. I don't want to come across as someone. I don't want to act like I know what I'm talking about. I mean, I gave examples here. Of course, the metrics I given are not the only ones, but I'm trying to bring up the idea that it's something that has to be discussed. And you know, I know, Sebastian knows, this needs to be discussed. It has to be thought out. And you know, we need to discover what we don't know, and that's why we have the conversation.
Yeah, well said, Neeraj. And like I say, I'm just enjoying this as much as humanly possible, because this is the kind of stuff that I like doing. Like, you know, I do, you know, I talk about politics with people from time to time, but I don't know, sometimes those conversations, they just don't do much to inspire me. It gets quite old. But discussing stuff like this, it kind of hits me where this is my field of knowledge, where I think that this is where the human mind can not just expand, but can actually be quite beneficial for us going forward if we can all kind of figure some of this stuff out. Anyway, Sebastian did reply as well in proof of work. If you do that, you waste your expensive hash rate. It's much harder to get everyone to mine with you than everyone to vote with you on proof of stake. Proof of stake is a shit stain on cryptocurrency. So once again, I'm going to have to leave this up to you, because I'm not as well versed in the blockchain and cryptocurrencies as you are. But I don't know if you wanted to reply.
Yeah, I'm going to avoid going into a rabbit hole about proof of work versus proof of stake, because it could kind of go into a religious thing. And
okay.
Most definitely, I mean, I have pushback. I like proof of work. That's how, just high level, that's how Bitcoin still works. And the problem is centralization. I mean, I think Sebastian and I are on the same page. Centralization is horrible, and high level, Bennett, this is not just in blockchain, but anywhere, right? I mean, we have centralization in our banking, we have centralization in our government here in Canada. Centralization just sucks. You know, I can give you a kind of a funny anecdotal relationship. I watch Star Trek. I'm not a Trekkie, but I love Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, me too.
One of the biggest bad guys in the Star Trek universe, they're the Borg. I don't know.
Yeah,
they're the Borg.
They're collectivists.
Yeah, the collective. You know what's one of the things about the Borg that makes them so powerful? They're decentralized. I know they kind of broke that in some of the movies, but the idea is there's no central hive mind. There's no one place that you can go and attack. There's this collective of drones, and it's not the perfect example, but decentralization is a beautiful thing. Blockchain, in its purest form, is decentralized. There are things like proof of stake and proof of work, if not considered properly, could lead to centralization.
Yeah.
You know, going back to the DAO, decentralized governance, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, though, because actually I am actually a big Star Trek fan too. I'll going all the way back to the original series. And actually it's funny because I don't even know if they did that because to be progressive, but I think even Voyager Janeway I was totally cool. So I guess I was progressive and a feminist before it was cool, right? But yeah, I thought she played a great captain. But the Next Generation, Jean-Luc, of course, that's probably to this day, it's still my favorite, and I've watched it multiple. Even my wife watches it with me, and we've watched it multiple times over the years. But it's funny you mentioned with the Borg, because I actually think of the Borg as actually the collectivists, so more like the socialists, and the Federation as being more like the American exceptional, and individualistic, because of the fact that they were going against, because there's no individual mind, right? That in terms of the Borg, I get you in terms of decentralized, because they kind of assimilate other cultures. right?
Yeah.
But so I kind of get where you're going there, but because they do assimilate all the cultures, and in case you notice, nobody talks except for like that chick, like the main.
Right. That's
So
right.
yeah, so basically, like you as the individual, no matter where you came from, like if no matter what planet where you were assimilated from, well, you're nothing. You're just part of the collective. You're just a gear in the machine. So I did get where you were going with that. So it's not.
But you make a really good point, and I got to navigate carefully when I use the Borg as a metaphor because of what you said. Because you're absolutely right. I think to put a really kind of specific focus, it's the fact that their decentralization made them, from a strength standpoint, incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Hey, well, you know what? Actually, I'll just give you a real quick because my wife actually, she does a lot of crafts, some really amazing stuff. Now she's doing this thing with like scrunchies, like for your hair and stuff. And she went to one of these craft places, and actually that would be, or a flea market. That's another one where you have a tremendous amount of people, and there's no governance per se if you go to a flea market or these markets, or even an outside like a market for your food, produce market or something. But there is a whole lot of variance and a whole lot of different people that come to the table with lots of different products, lots of different, sales tactics, lots of different things. No central planning, but it works out seamless. And think about how beneficial it is. I actually, when we lived in Ontario, I was actually, because we were living in Ajax, Pickering is the next city over. And I used to go to the Pickering flea market from the time I was a little kid. And I used to love the fact that it was one of the few places that you could go in Ontario. And most of the vendors, not all, there was a few, because once again, they all got to do their thing, right? But there was a lot of vendors who were they would even, now who knows, they might have even been wise in terms of just incorporated into the final sale, but there was no tax. So even if technically maybe you were paying a tax because maybe the price, maybe it was included in the price, but it was a great thing just to know that not only was I not paying tax, at least that I couldn't see, right? But there was also the fact that most of these people, these vendors in these markets, because there's so much competition immediate in the area, man, you want to talk about a place where you can negotiate and barter, and you actually feel as the customer as not someone that's just being talked down by the big corporate exec, and there's these rules and policies and everybody, no, it literally was kind of, and it is kind of almost anarchistic, except we do function in there is a state outside of the flea market, obviously. But when you're in those spaces, it feels very much like the kind of situation or scenario you're talking about.
Absolutely, and I think it's almost fallacious to assume that centralization is required to run anything. I mean, decentralization can work, and blockchain is a limited example, but blockchain is highly decentralized, and it's running great. It's been running for years, and it's a very solid governance model, right? And in fact. Talking about what I was going to talk about in terms of economics of running a country without taxation. I mean, the idea would be that you would actually use things like gold and Bitcoin and real traditional money, right? Like actual money, not currency, to run your country. Because, this whole idea of quantitative easing, which, by the way, as you know, is just a fancy term the government uses. So people, again, it's deflection. Like they don't want you to focus on the fact they're printing money like mad. And every time they print a dollar bill, they're literally reducing how much money you have in your pocket. So, that's kind of the idea, that you would be, it's all tied together, right? You're using gold or Bitcoin or maybe some combination as your legal tender versus, promise notes from the government, which honestly make absolutely no sense. And again, going back to what I said, it just blows my mind that I went through 12 years of schooling and 4 years of post-secondary, and they never talked about any of this.
Yeah.
Not once.
It's wild. Well, even let me just say one more thing in terms of the decentralization thing is we all experience this in our own world, and a lot of us even in our own occupations. Now, I am kind of a jack of all trades, and I do work so I drive truck and I do the heavy equipment stuff for the paving company I work for. But as most people know, a lot of our occupations are very much decentralized by the sheer fact that we do. It's the division of labor, right? I mean, think about what it takes even just to build a car. I mean, the division of labor, and it happens seamlessly. I don't know if you ever watched the movie, I think it was Milton Freeman or whatever, one of them that put it on, or no, maybe Lawrence Reed. Sorry, I'm probably butchering who it was, and I apologize that, but it was called I, Pencil. And even just to make one pencil, like the decentralization and the division of labor that travels across multiple continents, like, and that's just to make a pencil. So most people, if you think about it, most people are very much accepting and adapted already to the fact that we live in a decentralized world at some level. So why not bring that to, especially when you're talking about, the monopoly on force, like even if you want force, well, don't you want some kind of competing models in some way, in some regard, to see which one is more conducive to what you would prefer? I just can't believe that people in this modern world want to accept anything that's a one size fits all, right? When it comes to that stuff.
I mean, I watched a movie recently called Conclave, and I mean, I'm not religious, but I just watched it because it was a great movie, or I heard great things. And one of the things I took away from it was how certainty, the word certainty, and having certainty it can actually be unhealthy. And I apologize, I might be taking a little bit out of context of the movie, but bringing that to like even the real world we have, I actually think like a lot of people, especially on the left, they think certainty is a great thing. It's great to wake up in the morning and know you're guaranteed to have a job. I actually think it's dangerous. I actually really think it's important at some level to know that, like, to be kept on your toes, basically, to know that, hey, you know what, I got to step up. I got to keep improving. I got to keep learning. I actually have to keep performing. I have to provide economic output. Right. And if you don't do that, complacency kicks in. And, decentralization, if you really think about it, it's about competition. It's about making sure that, hey, you know what, you're not the only vegetable vendor. You're not the only provider of security. Imagine we had privatized police forces. Again, I'm not necessarily getting into whether that's the right thing or not, but if we had that, you wouldn't have the inefficiency of, say, the Vancouver Police Department or the RCMP, where they're thinking, well, we're the only game in town. Who gives a damn? It's not like they're going to fire me tomorrow. Well, actually, what if they could? Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring that up too, because actually, that's actually right up my. So I like I say, I've been racing machines since I was 18 years old. I started it with cars. I got into, when I moved into the rural New Brunswick, I got into four-wheelers and like race ATVs, snowmobiles, dirt bikes. I drive crotch rockets. I just love those things. And like you say, that idea that you're mentioning, that would just create stagnation. And that's the thing that in the racing world, we all realize, if government was in charge of racing and it was all centralized and no one had to improve themselves, right? And you felt like everything is just fine the way it is. Well, yeah, we would still be, I mean, what would you have? Like a 2 horsepower single cylinder engine, right? That might get down the quarter of a mile in half a day, right? To the point where now in 2025, you have these top fuel dragsters that can rip down 1,320 feet, just 1/4 of a mile at 3.5 seconds at well over 325 miles an hour. So fast, in fact, folks, this is something that a lot of people don't realize. So fast that if you had a GE, I forget the number, but a big fancy jet engine parked right beside that on a vehicle. Now that jet engine, if you give them a mile, will definitely pass by that 1/4 mile dragster. But that 1/4 mile dragster in a 1/4 mile is so built to be so efficient, so amazing use with the thousands of horsepower it has, that it can go from zero, standing still, hit the first mile an hour in 1 second, and finish that 1/4 mile at 325 mile an hour while that jet engine is still getting wound up. So that's the impressive feat. And that only came as a consequence of not being stagnant, of not centralizing, of not a one size fits all approach. And that's one area. Let me just say this one thing. That's one area that and it took me a while to figure this out, was the difference between people that build engines. So there's lots of people that can take parts, just like when you're a kid, you can put together Lego blocks or whatever. Now, you, at least if you don't have the picture, you would have to at least be inventive to create the picture in your mind to try to replicate that with a Lego. So there is some creativity in thinking of the box there. But if it's just a picture and you're putting the piece together based on, how the preconceived, the way it was supposed to be done, that's just remembering, repeating, like we were talking about earlier. That's not critical thinking. Whereas me, when I get into cars and stuff like that, I immediately get into racing, not just to repair my engine, but to build my engine so that I can beat the other guy. And in order to do that, the only way that happens is I have to be able to not just replicate what he did, because I'm not going to beat him if I just replicate what he did. I have to be able to think outside the box and come up with something that nobody else has thought of before. At least in that situation, we're now, and once again, and by me doing that, and this is the beautiful thing about in the racing sphere where I am, especially in the drag racing, and because it's most individualistic, it's just man and the machine, is we don't even see each other as like I never get mad at the guy, but I will go over and talk to him later. Hey man, you maybe want to share, is there anything you might be able to give me any pointers, right? but that's the beautiful thing. And so I wouldn't have any envy or resentment for something. I would want to try to see if I can possibly do that myself. And that whole time, like I say, from the very inception of the single cylinder with a few horsepower to 2025, the reason why that changed the whole time and got better and better and better to the point we are today is because no stagnation involved, competition, and rational self-interest. Not even benevolence involved, just rational self-interest, and it benefited us all tremendously, especially the people that like to race. But it also came out just like with race day. A lot of the modern technologies we have in our own personal vehicles came as a result of those racers as well. So anyways, I know I kind of went on a little bit, but that was kind of a personal one for me. So
no, that's terrific. I mean, I love that. I mean, it's decentralization, it's competition, and you know that at the end of the day, if you don't keep innovating, if you don't keep making that engine better, you know you're pretty certain you're not going to win. I mean, there's that fear, and you know that fear of the uncertainty is actually the driving force. It's the eye of the tiger, whatever you want to call it, right? Use your metaphor, but we need to have that. And the problem is we have a lot of people in power in charge of a lot of money, you know, that's been taken from us, and there's basically there's certainty. There's the certainty that tomorrow, irrespective of what I do today, I will have a job. I will be able to continue doing what I do, and there's no hunger to really run faster, like you talked about. And that really is a result of centralization. You don't have competition. Well, why would you? I mean, honestly, I don't think any person, you or me included, if we were in a position where we don't have any motivation to do better, we would do better. Why bother, right? That's ultimately, I think, how we're wired.
And I think it's antithetical to the human experience to be stagnant for so long, because if you think about even the humans that as we've evolved, we would still be just dragging our knuckles, I guess, or whatever. Well, I mean, depending on how you want to think about things. Sorry, folks, I don't want to offend some of the religious people out there, right? But I'm just saying that I am so, this is one area where, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, because every example that I've ever seen in my life, it has benefited not just the person that, you know, won the competition, but so many other areas in our lives. And then it gives something for others to aspire to, right? It's that thing to strive to. I think this is some of the greatest thing ever. So if anyone that tells you that you want to be stagnant or not creative or not being willing to think outside the box or just accept things the way they are, I don't know. Like, to me, I think that's just a terrible way. And I don't think it's good for our human mind. I think we humans were, you know, created and evolved so that we can do these things. And it's a terrible thing that there are people in our lives that are constantly trying to stagnate us and our brains and our ability to think so critically about these issues. Because, you know, we can come up with some good ideas, but think of what if all 8 billion of us on the planet were actually using our critical thinking skills. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like today if we were all doing these things, right?
Oh no, absolutely. And you know, going back to what you just said, like, you know, if we weren't thinking and we went back to, you know, earlier days and we were just dragging our knuckles and all. I mean, look at the animal kingdom, right? Look at Mother Nature. I mean, every creature out there, they don't have these centralized levels of government. It's not like every squirrel in the jungle or in the forest has some sort of government model where they're doing it. I mean, it's obviously ludicrous to even think about it. It's a very decentralized model. And yes, I know there are like packs of animals, like, you know, bears and whatever, they move in packs, but ultimately they're still very decentralized groups, and they compete and they do the best they can. And they use the rational thinking at their animalistic levels to survive. And it works, and it's been around for that long. And you know, I don't know if you're a fan of Jurassic Park. I love the movie. Jeff Goldblum in the movie, he made a statement at one point. He said, "Mother Nature always finds a way." And the reason I'm mentioning that is I'm not necessarily saying everything artificial is evil, but I'm saying that this whole idea where we have centralized artificial human governments and we sort of like, forget how Mother Nature intended it. Forget about us being decentralized and thinking for ourselves. Let's kind of form this huge artificial machine, and you know, let's just blindly do what the authorities tell us. It's not natural. It doesn't make sense. It's not how we're wired.
No, actually, when you talk about that in the Jeff Goldblum, I definitely remember that, and I liked his character in that movie, anyways. But I even think I shared a meme. It's been a while since I have, but it's basically it looks like it's probably in a small river or some sort, quiet part of the river, and there's a big rock, and you know the little the little tree that started to grow out of it. Like you say, nature finds a way, folks. Nature, and we are part of nature. That's the part that's crazy. And we live in the modern, like I say, think about what Elon Musk has done with his mind, and then saw all the other great minds out there that come out with so many ways to make our life more convenient, more comfortable, more prosperous. The fact that we have everything we have today. Like I forget who it was that said it, but it's a very true fact that even the poorest among us today live better than kings did a couple hundred years ago. So it's amazing what the human experience, what the human mind, what innovation and entrepreneurship can bring to the table. And the government is constantly strangling this. And this is the part to me is like, I want to see these kind of talents flourish. And like I say, in the marketplace of ideas, and as long as it's done under voluntary means and competition ensues and is always there, like I say, it's a boon for all of us, no matter who you are as a person, no matter what your political leaning or ideology is. It's always a benefit when we are given more opportunities, more chances and ideas to flourish and do it in our own way without having to have someone else impose their will on us. The live, let live mentality, it works in our household. It works, most people, when you go, whether you go to work, whether you're at home with your wife and your kids, you are living the libertarian philosophy. Well, unless you're some of those people that are doing terrible things, but most people, and of course there are those people, there are those exceptions and outliers, but even those people, right? There is the possible that they could be redeemed, even if they get the right information, the right ideas, the right people around them. But most people that reject anarchy or libertarianism, they themselves, if they thought about it for long enough, but a lot of times they don't, is you yourself like to probably live very much anarchistic and very much decentralized. I'm pretty sure as an adult, you still respect your mom and dad, but you're not allowing them to dictate everything you do in your life. And that's what it is. That's what libertarians are doing is, there's an old expression, you're probably familiar with this, is, we're getting ready we want to take over the world so we can leave you the hell alone.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really well put. And that's kind of what I've been talking about in this talk with you, is starting a country. So pardon my French, we can leave the people the fuck alone. It's like, you come there, do whatever you want, grow, do whatever you want. It's kind of like the atmosphere in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Picard talks about economics in Star Trek: First Contact when he's talking with people in the past. It's like, in the future, we don't have to worry about these things. You're free to pursue whatever you want. Like, I mean, it's obviously very utopic, and I don't like using the word utopic because people think, okay, that means it's impossible. It's a pie in the sky. But I actually don't think so. I actually think a lot of these things are attainable as long as there's a proper execution plan.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would have been 300 years ago if someone said that you would have this thing, like this little tiny rectangular box, right?
Yep.
That could give you access to not just the knowledge of the entire world if you want to look for it, right? But also if you want to, read a map, use a camera, right? I mean, I wouldn't even go on the million of things. So yeah, I get you, but that's the thing. What one person thinks that's a utopia, at some point in time. Well, it's just modern adaptation and technological advancements in certain times. So just like slavery would have been, there was times when people thought it's just the way it is, man. It's never going away. That's just the way it is. Well, we advanced past that, and we will advance past statism at some point in time too. But it's not going to happen natural. These things have to happen by sheer fact that we have to talk about these things. We have to help people evolve out of their old and antiquated way of thinking. They're modeling in terms of economics. They're modeling in terms in how you deal with each other in the social realm. That's what we're doing. So I think in reality, at the end of the day, I don't use the label, but the progressives, in reality, I find they are quite regressive based on the kind of things they're talking about today. Whereas libertarians, we are the ones that are truly all about progress, right? We are the ones that want humanity to get to a better point and at the individual level, not just for me, not just for you. But that's the other thing too. Then libertarians, just like objectivists, people might say, well, why would you care about other people? Well, it's not necessarily, I'm not Mr. Benevolent, right? It's not that I necessarily think about strangers or other people, but I do know this: for my rational self-interest and for the interest of the people that I care about, if everyone else around me are as happy and well-fed and and getting by as decent they can, that's less chance that I have to worry about them coming to steal from me or coming to do harm to me and my kids. So even if you're not doing it for benevolent reasons, even if it's just out of rational self-interest or the interest of the people you care about, this is the best thing we can do, is to progress people to the point where we don't have top-down centralized government, centralized banks that dictate and control how much our economic worth is. No, we need to get to the point where we have the live, let live mentality like we do in our own lives, where our aunts, uncles, cousins, sisters, brothers, we still have cooperation and interactions. As a libertarian, I love my family, but I do me, they do them. And when we're out in the social and economic realm, we agree to some very small rules, which is we just don't impose our will on each other or steal from each other. Pretty minor. A lot of us actually kind of knew this by the time we were 5 or 6 years old. And it took us our entire adult life for most of the people to have that wiped completely from their mind. Right?
Adding to what you're saying, libertarianism is really the natural state of the mind. It's not just how the animals think. It's probably how a child who's not necessarily indoctrinated yet by, the schooling system, preschool, whatever they learn, that's probably their natural state of thinking. Yeah. And obviously over time, most of us unfortunately get indoctrinated and it becomes almost our bedrock policy. But, some of us like you and I, and, hopefully a lot of the listeners have kind of at least realized, if not broken away from the fact that actually that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And like you said, like even the most progressive leftist people, at the end of the day, they're actually living their lives in their nuclear families in a very kind of libertarian environment. And yet when it comes to the governance of the country or whatever level of, governance, they think that, oh, wait a minute, it has to be this other way. And that, that doesn't necessarily really make a lot of sense. So I actually think that libertarianism is not something I really have to convince people about, because really it's not about teaching them something new. It's almost about unteaching them stuff that they've come to take for granted and accept without questioning, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually, I have found over the years, of the more libertarians, anarchists, voluntarists, critical thinkers, independents I've talked to, the ones who I find I have the most close relationships, association, and agree with the most, what it comes down now, of course, there's way more to it than just this, but a lot of it is your resistance to fear-driven narratives. I find most libertarians are not susceptible to fear dominating or skewing how they think about things. And that's what happens, I think, to a lot of people, because I don't believe most people are bad, or actually that all people who believe in the state are just horrendous people, right? I think they've been taught. And fear is a very big driving factor. It is for human, and it is in the state of nature. For any living thing that has a brain, fear is a major driving force. And the Machiavellian minds of the past, and they've tweaked this stuff over the centuries to modern days. And we've seen the COVID thing, right? Even people that were decent, we even see it in our own personal lives. People that I even knew that was a decent person, and it gets turned on just like a switch. And it was always at the core of everything that they were doing, it was a fear. They allowed fear. And rather than try to work outside of that and maybe put themselves in a better place where they can alleviate their fears, they allowed that fear to dominate. And that's a big thing for me. And it doesn't matter about your political spectrum or ideology or preference. Don't allow people to dictate you in such a manner by using that natural state of fear to control you in that way. That, to me, no matter if you're a progressive, a right winger, I don't care who you are, to be honest with you, stop allowing these people to use fear to completely micromanage, dictate, and control your life, because that's literally how they're doing it. And if there's one thing that you should know at this point in time, and which is why people like me and Neeraj and so many other libertarians, we've shown by leading by example and by the acts and our deeds, we're just here to talk and discuss things. We're not looking to impose anyone. So in one area, and I know some of the leftists, they might like their safe space, and I'm not a big fan of it, but hey, and the one thing, if you're looking for somewhere where you can talk about ideas in a place that you feel at least safer than most, is reach out to some libertarians. And I'm telling you, here's the thing why I say leftists a lot, is because I've also come to learn over the years, Neeraj, is even with a business, and I, as someone that run a business myself, and my wife has run a business, well, you can be the conservative minded person. Now, these are personality traits. There's all exceptions and outliers for sure, but you need the number cruncher, the conservative minded guy. But man, if you want to have a really successful business, you want the creative. So the lefty, right? The progressive, the one with the more artistic talents. You need that. And that's the thing with even when you're raising kids, men come with certain strengths. Women come with certain strengths. That is the thing. So when you hear people talking about divide, whether you're talking about along the lines of sex or even political preferences, always know this. It's the divide is the worst thing could happen, actually, because we need each other. Just like men need women and women need men. Well, lefties and right wingers, we need each other. So let's at least get away from this fear-driven narrative where we got to see each other as our enemies or our opponents and come together, because me and Neeraj, we might be decent at coming up with the number crunching and doing that stuff, but we might need you to take our very technical stuff and maybe make it into a Sunday movie that could get this message out to millions of people in real time in a way they don't feel like they're being lectured to or be preached to. This is the beautiful thing about having multiple talents and multiple fields of study all coming together. And that's actually something I'm not sure if you want there, Neeraj, but there's a lot of us, and I'll let you know when this is actually being finalized. But there is actually, I'm actually part right now of a large group, mostly people in the media space, although I don't really consider myself a media space, but I have done a lot of news and media. So technically, I guess I am, but we're all coming together and mostly on X now. But I'm talking about some of the most prominent alternative media voices in this country. I won't do name dropping just yet, but there's literally dozens of us that are coming together. And hopefully we're going to create something where it'll still be decentralized. Everyone gets to do and participate, do their own thing. But we're at least going to have some area where we can commonly assemble and bring all these ideas and our talents to bear. And you know, like I say, when it's all said and done, Neeraj, yeah, I might be thinking about inviting you as well, because I know you could bring lots to the table as well, man.
Oh yeah, no, that I'd love that. I mean, that sounds amazing. I think that one of the ironic challenges with libertarians that I run into, even when going to party meetings and all that, is we're so welcome. I mean, being libertarians and being true to the word, we welcome everyone. We welcome, like, if somebody from the left for whatever reason decided to come to our event or even join the party, we're never going to say no to them. They're completely welcome. Anybody from the right. I mean, that is our mandate, that you're free to speak what you want. I mean, we're not necessarily going to agree with you, but you're welcome to be there. And that's, I guess, one of the challenges is sometimes when we want to form government, we have to have kind of a cohesive voice, because unfortunately, one of the things that the voters want is they want to kind of see that uniformity, which is done very well from the extreme levels of the political spectrum, because they can kind of come out and give you the universal voice. But the problem is, do they really believe in that, or are they really just kind of following a platform? And I really love what you just said, which is, libertarians, we are open to that. I mean, we in fact welcome people that don't agree with us, because we want that discord, right? That's how we learn things. That's how we make things better. That's the problem right now we have with any kind of government. We've got a polarizing effect, right? We either have the conservatives, or want to call them the Republicans, and then it flips back and forth, and it's a ping pong game, and the voters are, they're just reacting to things, and they're not even realizing that, hey, wait a minute, what I'm reacting to and going for is exactly the opposite of what happened for like 2 election cycles ago or something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, even if you just think of the example, if you don't want to think at the macro level, break it down to the micro, the family level, as the kid that's playing the mom and dad against each other, right?
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever. But I mean, sure, you can get away with that. Like whoever promises you the most, right? That's the one that you vote for, right? Or decide you want to go live with or whatever. And that'll work out you in the short term for sure, until you have your own kids, right? And then that's the thing with humans. We get to experience that. Well, especially at least if you have children and stuff, you get the experience of what it is to be the child. Then you also get to experience what it is. So you get to see both sides of the equation, whether you like it or not. And some things that might benefit you in an interim or in the short time, it might prove to be a detriment for the long term. And that's the thing, like I say, which is so nice of having all kinds of people come together, is there's so many blind spots that we can help fill in those gaps with each other. And that's where the human creativity and the human mind and the human flourishment, where it's so, I mean, I watch, I'll just say this and then I'll let you go on there. But I even think about the whole SpaceX thing. I mean, think about all the people that came together and make it, not just that a private company can send things into space, but my God, watching that thing catch that big giant booster coming back and just catching it, it's like, wow. Can you imagine how much cooperation and how many great minds and people that came together, and what a rewarding experience that is too, to be able to do that. And I want to do that, but not just like, we'll leave Elon. He's got the space thing covered for now, although I invite more competition, the more the merrier. But in terms of the idea space, in terms of governance, this is an area where libertarians flourish. And I'm not saying it's me, I'm not saying it's Neeraj, but I'm saying there's lots of great minds in this country, of libertarian minds, and as well as our American friends and many around the world, that, and that's the thing, in the information age, we can come together, we can have great chats with people across the ocean and halfway around the world, some great libertarian minds and others as well. So yeah, give the libertarians a chance. I know a lot of people these days kind of been thinking, well, they were tricked and convinced that libertarians are just these worst people, because for some reason, I guess, I don't know, the status and have convinced a lot of them that we're just, I don't know, heartless, I don't know, whatever. We just want to see people die in the gut or whatever. But no, all a libertarian is at the end of the day is someone who actually thinks critically. That's really what a libertarian is, because even the old expression, the joke between libertarians, it's an insider joke, is between a libertarian, how long does it take to be a libertarian and an anarchist? About 6 months. Well, all it is a libertarian, because they are critical thinkers. If you take self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle, extrapolate what that means, and then follow through those ethics or those principles consistently, well, you end up with, well, we can't have a ruler. We can't have people who control and micromanage this, right? So that's literally what a libertarian is. So stop listening to the rhetoric of people who are probably benefiting from the state. Most of the people who are talking smack about libertarians, they're probably doing their own little rational self-interest, because they're benefiting themselves through the state at your expense, right? So that's the thing about libertarians. We actually understand. I know what you're doing. I'm just saying, I'm good with you having your rational self-interest. I'm just saying, you don't get to trick other people into having to be your slaves, serfs, or subjects in order to be the ends to your mean. I'm saying you can have what you want, but you got to go out and do that voluntarily, or with other cooperation who people want to help you to do that. You don't get to force your way on it. You don't get to step on me and Neeraj in order to get there. You got to do that yourself.
Well, one of the things, like I get engaged in a lot of conversations with people that support these, existing statist mechanisms and, left-wing socialism and all that. And, it gets tiring at a point, and I've kind of reached this point where I'm like, I generally just look at people and I just appeal to morality. And I go, at the end of the day, man, you're telling me in the same breath that you support taxation and you support all these mechanisms that basically extract resources, in this case, money in the form of taxation, from people that have worked hard in the name of a social program to help the needy. And I go, I completely support that, helping the needy. I completely support every nice, generous thing you're doing. But the problem is, you already lost me in step one, because there's really two steps. The first step is acquiring the money.
Yep.
And you already lost the moral ground right there, because you already went and engaged in robbery at that point. And now you're saying, Your Honor, well, I did rob the lady, but I went and took the money and bought food for the homeless. I'm like, yeah, but you robbed someone doing it. That you don't get to sit here and justify it, right? So that's kind of my argument. And it's so amazing how quickly you corner someone logically like that. Like, I mean, generally when I have that conversation with someone, they're just gonna walk away, or they're gonna call me names. That's really what it comes down to, because there's really no logical response to that.
No.
Like, what are you gonna say?
And it's so funny, because I've heard actually people, well, not heard, because it was probably in text form online when I actually seen it. But in terms of that, what you were describing, and people say, oh yeah, but what about Robin Hood? It's like, well, wait a minute. Did you not pay attention to the story of Robin Hood, or did you just listen to someone else interpret the story of Robin Hood for you? Robin Hood didn't steal from anybody to redistribute it. No, he took back the money that was already plundered, right? The government was the one, the king or whatever the hell. I can't remember the story exactly. What
the sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah, the sheriff of Nottingham. That's it. Yeah. He was the one that stole the money. So Robin Hood didn't steal. Yes. And it wasn't the fact that he stole from people and spread that wealth around. No, it was the fact that he took the money back from the thieves, the original thief, which was government, and gave it back to the people. So no, you can't use the example of Robin Hood, because Robin Hood actually Robin Hood would have agreed with a libertarian.
I grew up, I don't know where it came from that Robin Hood was stealing from rich to give to the poor. I don't know where that line came from, but it's absolutely misleading and wrong.
Yeah. Well, this is well. Actually, you know what, Neeraj? It's a thing. That's the thing with these sophists, these leftists, or I don't know what you want to call them. I don't like to use leftists, but these people that are the sophists, the central planners among us, is they distort the meaning, just like with COVID. So actually, they did lie, because he did. If you want to get technical, if I had a lawyer sitting over my shoulder, he would tell me, yeah, that passed muster, because he did steal from the rich and give to the poor. But in the proper context but that rich person was the person that was the original thief that took the money at the beginning. So all he was really doing it, but that's the thing. I suppose it wouldn't have came out quite so easy if he said, well, he was actually just taking back the money that the guy already stole to give back to the people that originally owned one in the first place. That would have been, I think, too long of a sentence. And maybe there was some commies and socialists that kind of wanted to convey that particular narrative so that would get maybe their kids or someone else to think along those lines. They hate those rich, right?
Oh yeah. Well, that I think that's why that came out, and I have to admit, I only recently realized this a few years ago, because I grew up with Robin Hood, and I'm like, wait a minute, the guy was just unstealing. He's basically undoing the theft.
Yeah,
and the only reason you're calling it theft is because you're recognizing that the sheriff was some sort of benevolent authority that had some moral right to do whatever he did in the first place. So it's
Oh yeah. Well, like I say, you would even have to get into the dirty areas of legalese to even say, I like to use the term theft. But see, what a lawyer, someone that talks legalese would say is, well, theft is taking something from someone without their permission, right?
Right.
And the king definitely wouldn't have gave him permission to steal the proceeds of the theft that he already took. So this is what I mean. This is the greasy part. And once again, I don't hate all lawyers, but I do. But it is a little greasy when the fact. Now, of course, if you're on a charge, and you probably want that lawyer to be able to be a little bit manipulative when you're the one on the other end of it. I suppose, right?
You want the bulldog, sure.
Right. But you got to keep this in mind, folks. That's the thing. Like some of these like terms and slogans and stuff, you really do. And that's one area where that's a strong point for libertarians is, we kind of scratch beneath that surface and see that underlying meaning. And I think maybe that's something that more people need to do is, once again, we're back to the critical thinking about these things, right? Laugh at it at first, but then think about what does that actually mean? Because Robin Hood wasn't a thief stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. He was taking back the money that was already stolen from the poor. So he was actually doing the right thing. He was actually doing something that was moral and ethical.
Absolutely, 100%. And I really wish somebody would, I don't know, Disney, or maybe not Disney anymore, but somebody should come out with a version of Robin Hood that makes that a little more obvious.
Yeah, for sure. Right on. Well, I know I kind of been on a ramp. Did you get to finish up your thing there? Because I know
I was just gonna put some finishing thoughts on this, like execution plan. So real quick, I mean, I kind of talked already about them, and I just kind of want to bring it together. Here's the execution plan for anybody listening to this who wants to go ahead and do this, or do they want to contact me and they want to talk about this further. So phase one is what I started with an economic takeover. So the idea is, again, I'm just throwing an example out there to create some concreteness to my conversation. 100,000 libertarians decide to relocate to Tuvalu. They make massive business investments. They buy up land. They take over the economy. Again, take over in a nice, ethical, moral way that helps everyone, right? Yeah. They become indispensable to the local population. The local people love them. They're now part of the economy. The country is doing great. It's phase two, political domination. Run libertarian candidates in elections. Take over the government positions legally. Again, I'm using the word takeover, but legally, following the letter of the law. Rewrite the Constitution. Abolish taxation and implement proper voting mechanisms. We won't go too much now into how that's done, but we get the idea. That's obviously a separate conversation on how that's done, but we're going to assume it's figured out.
Right.
Phase three, international recognition. Declare a libertarian state. Welcome immigration. Welcome people that are like-minded to come in and create this utopia. And I'm going to use that term now. It's a libertarian utopia. It's for people that want to think critically. It's people that believe in technological innovation, the use of AI, the use of free thinkers, and having open discord, decentralization, and ultimately become that, in terms of a hub, like a financial hub, a thought hub for the world. So that's kind of what brought me to this thought process. And it's a result of just, honestly, necessity. Like, I mean, I'm frustrated. I'll be honest. I'm very frustrated with the misuse of resources, the fact that we as a country, we have so much potential and we're squandering it. And it's like, what do we do? What can we do? Well, maybe we can do it here, or maybe we go start a country somewhere else, and maybe that country becomes a shining beacon and it trickles down to the rest of the world. And maybe Canadians see that and go, wait a minute, we need that too, right? So we need that example. And I think that something like this can be done.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually great, because now that I think about it, so even statists and collectivists, here's the thing. So I'm going to pitch this idea even to the statists and the collectivists, because here's the thing. So we already know that the statists and the collectivists, they loathe us libertarians, right? We're their arch nemesis. We are their enemy, right? So here's the thing. Yeah. Give us the leeway, right? Loosen the shackles enough that we can do this.
Right.
And if the experiment fails tremendously, horrendously, well, you can run in all your establishment media papers and on your publications just how terrible these see, look, it'll never work.
It's a temporary government program.
Right. Or on the other side, here's the flip side of it, because we got to remember that these collectivists are very parasitical in nature. They don't want to work. They just want to live off the backs of others. So here's the thing. Just like you're doing with all the countries now, and like in Canada, skimming off the top. Well, if it turns out that it is an actual experiment that does prove to be successful, and you got a little bit of blood on your nose, or a bruised ego in some way because it did, well, then how do you cover up that? Well, grab yourself a big expensive bottle of wine and invade that country, or at least attempt to, and then you can skim off the top if you win, right? Against the people, because if you think about it, if it actually proves to be as successful as I believe it would be if libertarians are in charge of it, then yeah, you'd actually it'd be a great benefit or a boon to you statists and collectivists, because that'd be a big giant pie that was not existing in before that you could dig your big fat noses into, right? So I think I can find positive in it for everybody.
I'll kind of give some final thoughts on this as well, Ben. I mean, I'd love to talk to you for the next 5 hours. I have so much stuff we can talk about, but I'll kind of give some final thoughts. I lived in Singapore for a while, and Singapore is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's really, I have to be careful in bringing it up as an example, because in terms of critical thinking and free thought, Singapore is probably one of the last places I was ever bring up as an example. But to look at it as a kind of a nation state, Singapore was ejected from Malaysia, I believe, is in the 50s or 60s, and they basically had nothing. And they're in some ways, economically at least, maybe not politically, but economically, they're a very libertarian country. Super low taxes, not zero, but very low. They actually have a democracy in that they have voting. I don't know if they actually call themselves a democracy, but they have elections. But they're also an example, I would like to call, of a benevolent dictatorship. I mean, they basically had the same people in charge ever since the start, when Lee Kuan Yew basically started the country. And the country is obviously doing really, really well economically. Like, they're a superpower. But if you actually look at them, they don't have natural resources like Canada have. They don't have any of the kind of natural born benefits that we have here. And look at what they're doing with what they got, right? They've become a financial hub. They're a supply chain hub. They've got a seat at the table. And one of the reasons I think it is because they're making a lot of fantastic decisions on an economic level, right? And I think that's one of the examples. Like, you take that and then you combine it with what we got in the West, right? At least some of us libertarians, like, we do have a strong libertarian movement, especially in the US, but also people like us in Canada. You take that, you combine that, you got a force to be reckoned with if you could actually carve out a country that takes the best of these things, like the economic side and the political side, and you meld it together.
Right. And that's a perfect example with even if it's a Machiavellian type of mindset that's running this place, and they're only doing it for their own rational self-interest, because the more you make, the more they can take. Well, at the end of the day, and once again, I'm not advocating for any state taking any portion of anyone's wealth. I'm against that entirely. But I can see the case where, at least if you're giving your citizens more economic prosperity, bearing wealth, well, the wealthier they are, well, the more that you have, more disposable income they can have that you can steal from them. So, like I say, even at the statist level, it just makes sense. Even if you're a bad parent, right? Even if you're a terrible person, when you're raising your kids and you realize at some point in time that you're going to be reliant on them in the future, you probably want them to be in a good position, right? Even if they piss you off and they've done things that you don't like and all that, for your own rational self-interest, you're going to be like, fuck, I hope they're well adjusted. I hope they're doing okay economically and they're in a position that they can help me when I'm in my desperate need. So once again, this is the thing about thinking from first principles, thinking from the libertarian mindset, even using the objectivist understanding of things. Like I say, you don't even if you're not the kind of person that's benevolent, you can see the logic in giving people their freedoms, no matter which perspective or which angle you want to come about it. The more social and economic freedoms we have at the individual level, the better it is for everybody in society. So I don't see why anyone wants to argue against that, other than the fact, well, they're being told a lot of bullshit and they're sucking up hook, line, and sinker.
Well, and you brought up a great point. I mean, I didn't even think about that. I love what you brought up. I mean, yes, it's almost like they're taking smaller pieces of the pie, like the income tax rate is smaller, but the damn pie is so damn big because, I mean, they don't have poverty. Everyone's doing well. I mean, well, they got a fantastic economic system. So yeah, they're not taxing their citizens to death, but they don't need to because they're taking a small percentage of a large pie and everyone's doing well. And of course, maybe, and again, I'm not slighting to libertarianism, but if you look at cause and effect, maybe there's a reason that people like you and I turned around and started asking questions at some point in our life. Maybe we wouldn't have done that if we were in a country like Singapore. Maybe if you and I, had this economic system, we would just be conforming and be sheeple like, some people might be. But we're doing this because there's obviously something that can be improved upon. So it's a little bit of an ironic situation where you look at them and you go, yeah, they have a country of followers, but why not? I mean, they're happy and they're doing really well. They don't need it, right? So it's interesting. So I almost want to take that now and almost steal only the economic side and take that and take that only and take libertarianism combined and be like, wow, we can do even better, right? Like, why not?
Yeah. Well, I would even say this right now. If we, in the modern world we live in today, if we just had even something as simple, and I hate to say this because, well, the minarchists among my friends will like this, but if you said even a 10%, we're going to take 10% of your income or whatever for whatever, but there's going to be, desperately needed social services provided, whatever. And that was it. But you could get to keep the 90%. Once again, as much as I'm vehemently against taxation and any kind of economic enslavement, like you say, it would definitely tamp down. That's the thing. These people that are alive today that are running things, it does kind of show that they're not the cream of the crop. The cream of the crop in the past, like it's the ones that truly had that kind of Machiavellian mindset were the sophist and could sell you snake oil, like the snake oil salesman, or could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo kind of people. Like I say, even that's the thing. They've stagnated. Even these people have stagnated to the point that they don't really have anything on offer except, they reach for when things get really desperate, they look for, in case of this, break glass and just give everybody free money. That's where you're at. You're just going to devalue the currency basically to not. That's your last go. Well, it tells me you're running out of ideas, and maybe you fuckers need to get out of the way. Right?
Yeah, and it's a very good point you're bringing up, and I do think there's almost some sort of correlation if we were to sit down and study it and see that in places like Canada, United States, even in Europe, this rise of this sort of libertarian movement, it's not an accident. It's coming out of necessity. There's people like us. We're starting to ask questions. It's quite possible, even me myself, I admit, if I hadn't run into certain situations up to this point in my life, it's possible I would have never even gone to the libertarian movement. I would have just, like a lemming, I would have just rode along with everyone else because I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm keeping 90% of my income. I got a nice house. I'm pretty happy. What's the necessity to even rock the boat? We're rocking the boat because it needs to be rocked.
Yeah. Well, I for one, Neeraj, really, really glad for whatever happened to you in your life. Not that I happy about any of the bad things that happened, but I'm really happy whatever it did that got you to this point, got me to be able to meet you 6 years ago and got me to be able to have another conversation with you today, because I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And it gives me hope for the future to know that it's not just you, but there's so many other great minds and great, not just Canadians, but other individuals out there that are truly thinking about these things at the ideas level and trying to problem solve and figure out how we get out of this stuff. And like I say, like us or not, folks, at the very least, at least we're that group of people who are doing our thing, but we're not trying to impose our will. We're just trying to come up with the ideas, and hopefully that at some point in time, one or two of them will stick, and the majority or the mob, the populace, will get on board. And like I say, it'll benefit us all at the end of the day. So like I say, I'll if you don't mind there, I'm probably going to tie this one up, Neeraj, but I'll give you another. I'll give you another little time to. I did want to say too. I see Sneeko. Thanks for joining the chat a little late there, buddy, because we're going to be soon tying up. But I really appreciate Sebastian and the questions you had there too. But like I say, if you ever want to have more conversation about this, Neeraj, I really, really am genuinely and sincerely interested about having talks like this. I typically these days try to keep my streams between 2-3 hours at most. I could, like you, I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I find that gets to the point where some people don't really care, and then they'll just scroll on by. But I want people to actually watch these live streams because there's a lot of great information contained in them. I appreciate everything you've brought to the table today. And like I say, if you ever want to have another discussion, talk about this, whether it's a part 2 or even something entirely different, I'm more than willing to do so. But at the end of the day, like I say, I'm just very thankful you've come on here. And if there's anything else you want to say before you go, and actually just in case I forget before we tie this up, if there's any links that you want me, because you were saying like if anyone wants to reach out to you, so just send me any links in that message that we were messaging back and forth, and I'll make sure to place all those links in the description of the video. So anyways, like I say, if there's anything you want to say to tie this bad boy up.
Well, I would just say that, I think that the number one thing we got to start with is just having open forum on Discord. Like you were talking, Bennett, half an hour ago about, having a group of people around Canada, like people like Jordan Peterson, whatever, yourself, myself, lots of people. I think we need to have some level of organization where we can at least talk about these things and have a forum to talk about it. I really love that we had this conversation. This is something I really wanted to do. And I think we also need to talk about practically about doing things, not just about conversation. Like, one of the things that I'll kind of end with is, I'm definitely an active member of the Libertarian parties, but the real unfortunate thing is I don't necessarily really feel that in the current climate that we have, that a libertarian is really practically going to get elected. And this is kind of what gave the genesis to me thinking that, okay, fuck it. If we can't really form a libertarian government here in Canada, because I have people coming to me and saying, Neeraj, instead of whining about like what's going on, why don't you go and make changes? And I'm like, dude, seriously, I've run in 2 elections. I know practically people like me are not going to get elected. So this is me being very practical and being like, okay, I'm a business guy. I'm like, if it doesn't work, find a solution. So I'm like, well, maybe this is not the worst idea in the world. Maybe we should be looking at some sort of idea of starting another country. And I was very serious about what I wrote about this. So I would definitely, as a final remark, I'll put a message to you about how we can maybe have this, but I would definitely welcome conversations with others that have listened to this about where this can go, what can we do with this? How can we put this to some sort of real test?
Yeah. Well, Neeraj, actually, I did want to say one more thing. I wasn't going to, but when you brought that up, because I want to emphasize this for you and everyone else that's part of the Libertarian parties. We even have one in New Brunswick now. Shout out to Keith Tays. He's the leader of the party, and he just started up there just before we had the election here. He started up 2 months beforehand, and the amount of work and him and all the other people actively involved that they did to get the party up. And of course, like you were saying, it wasn't a whole lot in terms of, it's not like they won any ridings or anything, but this is the thing. What I think about the Libertarians, just like the Libertarian Party in the US, is it's a very thankless job, folks. I got to tell you. So that's why I have a lot of respect. I think there's areas sometimes where I have more respect for the people that are within the party than even just people like myself that are just kind of private citizens doing their thing and doing a little bit, talking about stuff online, because I know how difficult that is. And what I consider the Libertarian Party of Canada, not much if they're caring about that anymore in the United States, but the big thing with the states, and as well as here about having a Libertarian Party, is it's already there. And the beautiful folks across this country who have made sure that we have a federal Libertarian Party, and you have a Libertarian Party in BC and Ontario, New Brunswick, and a lot of the provinces in this country, it's there in case you need it. It's there, just like in an emergency, right? Well, because that's the thing, right? We don't want to go through violent revolutions. We want to change things at the cultural level and at the political level, right? So if you're going to do that, you need that political option. And the Libertarian Party of Canada and all the tireless people who have been actively involved for all these years, doing the fundraising, out there banging on doors, even the administrators, the people behind the scenes, all that stuff, all the people who are actively involved in the Libertarian Party any of the parties in this country. I am super grateful for everything you do, because you never know when. Like right now, yes, there's not much of a political solution that I see a viability for libertarian candidates. And I know that's a little soul crushing for people, but you just got to be realistic at times. But that's not to say that it can't change. And, you know, humans have free will. Things could really dramatically change in this country. Things could get so bad that Canadians actually are starting to look and pivot towards, like, yeah, this ain't working no more. So we got to go somewhere else. And that's where the libertarian parties in this country are right there and waiting. Like I say, and the fact that they put in this tireless effort year after year and election cycle after election cycle, my heart goes out to every one of you, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everything you doing as well there.
Thank you, Bennett. It was an absolute pleasure. I wish we had all the time in the world, but I'll be reaching out for having some more of these.
Right on, right on. All right, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the live stream, and make sure to share it around to some people, not just libertarians. Like I say, share this around to people that could genuinely, you know, learn from, listen to this kind of information and these ideas. And I'll see you in the next one. This is the Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.